Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the launching ceremony of the Green Investment Principles, Southeast Asia Chapter, and Sustainable Finance Forum. I'm Rania from CSIS Indonesia, your host for today. Before we start, I would like to thank all the speakers and participants who are joining us here in Jakarta, as well as those who are tuning in online through Zoom or YouTube. Thank you for taking the time out of your day, and we hope that you'll be able to gain a lot of insights from today and tomorrow's discussion. I would like to first give a very warm welcome to the co-chair of GIP, Dr. Majun, and then the chair of GIP Southeast Asia, Dr. Pangestu, and the co-chair of GIP Southeast Asia, Mr. Rino Donosepoetro. Southeast Asia faces the dual challenge of being vulnerable to and contributing significantly to climate change. The region, heavily reliant on fossil fuels, may suffer a cumulative GDP loss of up to 11% due to climate-related impacts. To address this, Southeast Asia countries are investing in climate solutions, including sustainable finance and the development of carbon markets. Initiatives like ASEAN Green Taxonomy and partnerships such as the Just Energy Transition Partnership aim to accelerate the transition to clean energy. Despite these efforts, there's a significant financing gap of up to $1.8 trillion, which urges the need for rapid mobilization of private funds through closer cooperation at various levels. The Green Investment Principles was established in 2018 to bring awareness to green principles in financing development projects. Its main secretariat in Beijing, alongside regional chapters in Africa and Central Asia, the banking and finance sectors across all regions have gathered to engage in dialogue and cooperation on green finance. With the challenges Southeast Asia faces in financing climate solutions, the launch of Green Investment Principles Southeast Asia Chapter acts as a kickstarter to involve the financial and banking sectors of the region to tackle these challenges. This is a combination of 1.5-day public event and closed-door events. The first half of today will be kickstarted with a public launching ceremony and keynote speeches intended to set the tone for discussions. And the rest of today and tomorrow will consist of 4 invitation-only roundtable events, which encompasses the topic of green taxonomy, carbon markets, financing green projects, and financing energy transition. And to officially start today's agenda, we have 4 welcoming remarks lined up. I first would like to invite and welcome the chairman of China Green Finance Committee and co-chair of GIP Steering Committee, Dr. Majun. Dr. Majun, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rania. Ibu Mari Pengazu, Sir William, Park Rino Donny, DG Jin Zhongxia, Dr. Boby Hernawan, Ibu Fransiska Oei, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. On behalf of the steering committee of the GIP, I would like to extend my warmest welcome to all of you for attending this launch event for GIP Southeast Asian Chapter, which is co-chaired, co-hosted by a few organizations, including the GIP Secretary, CSIS, IFS, and Standard Chartered Bank. GIP is a short form of the Green Investment Principles for the Belt and Road, which was launched in 2018 under a collaborative initiative between China and the UK. And 7 organizations jointly drafted a set of principles for green investment in the Belt and Road. These included the Chinese Green Finance Committee, City of London, World Economic Forum, UNPII, IFC, Policy Institute, and BRBR. These 7 principles are designed to promote the risk analysis and management on environmental and climate issues, promoting disclosure of environmental information, promoting the usage of green and sustainable finance instruments. And the goal is to enhance the capacity of the sustainable investment by institutions that's operating in the emerging markets and developing countries. Over the past few years, the GIP has set up 4 working groups on capacity building, including 1 on risk analysis, 1 on disclosure, 1 on product innovation, and more recently, we created this working group on transition finance. And 3 regional chapters have been created to disseminate the principles and build capacity in the regions, including about 2 years ago, we created this, the Central Asian chapter. And last year, we created this African chapter. And today, we're launching officially the ASEAN chapter. So far, the GIP has close to 50 formal members. And these are largely financial institutions from all over the place, including from China, from Europe, UK, and also many emerging market economies. And in the past 5 years, we can see significant enhancement of capacity in many different aspects, including on disclosure of sustainability-related indicators, on the adoption of taxonomy by some countries and some institutions which are members, and also the scaling up of a lot of offerings of financial products in the green space. So I'm very glad that we are formally launching the GIP Southeast Asian chapter today, which will be chaired by Madam Mary Pangestu. I'm sure everybody knows Mary very well, and also co-chaired by Donny, who is the vice chair of Standard Charter in the region. And we're hoping that this chapter will be an important platform for disseminating the green investment principles in the region, for capacity building, for facilitating green transactions, and possibly can also work on initiatives such as taxonomy-related topics, which will build a bridge for dialogue between private sector and the public authorities. Now, let me take this opportunity also just to say a few words on the key lessons, at least myself has learned in the past 10 years on working on green finance, both in China and also globally. For example, during my co-chairmanship of the G20 Sustainable Finance Working Group. Really, two main points. One is that green finance is not just a few financial products. It must be an ecosystem. And this ecosystem will involve at least 5 elements. Number one is taxonomy, which will clearly define what green activities are and where financial resources should be devoted to. And the second thing is the disclosure requirement. The project owners, the issuers will have to disclose environmental information so that they can review the environmental benefits of these projects to the investors. And thirdly, we need a range of products, not just one or two. We need green loans, green bonds, the carbon markets, the private equity investment instruments, the blended finance instruments, and so on, to meet the diverse demands from the real economy for green activities. And number 4, it's a policy incentive, which is very important, I think, in the earliest stage of green finance development, because a lot of projects, they are green, but they're not bankable yet. And that's why by lowering the funding cost, by providing some subsidies, by arranging a platform for matching, I think it's important to have these incentives and mechanisms in place to enable many of the green projects to become bankable. And finally, it's a capacity building. In fact, in all of these 4 areas I just mentioned, taxonomy, incentives, disclosure, and products, we need capacity at the government level, regulatory level, and financial institutions level, and also within the ecosystem for those that are providing services. For example, those who do carbon accounting, those who do disclosure reports for the corporates, and those who probably will help you to develop the products to utilize in the carbon market. And to that end, the GIP, I think, will play a major role in facilitating dialogue, in producing knowledge-sharing platforms for experiences globally to be brought to the region. And also, next week, I'm going to the COP. My team is going to announce a new capacity building alliance, which is called CSIS. The full name of that is Capacity Building Alliance for Sustainable Investment, of which GIP is a member. And in fact, the CSIS program will involve at least 42 members as of today, and in the future will be involving more. So it will be a platform for aggregating knowledge in sustainable finance and distributing through multiple channels so that we can make the knowledge sharing less costly and more productive in terms of its outreach to a larger number of people in the developing world. My second point is that green finance requires partnership between many, many key players. It's not just the job of one financial institution or a financial regulator. It must be the collaboration between and among the governments, the regulators, financial institutions, and the corporates. And this is really to address one key bottleneck, which is lack of bankability, lack of bankable projects in a lot of developing markets, including Indonesia, which I heard a lot yesterday. And now, on this topic, let me give you just one example of how this kind of collaboration can help produce bankable projects in a pilot green finance region in China, which is called Huzhou. I told that story to Donny yesterday. In Huzhou, the government created the e-platform for matching projects, which is organized partly by government and also absorbing those project pipeline from the corporates. And on the other side of the platform, it's 20-something banks. And in the past 5-6 years, they matched thousands of projects and raised something like 500 billion RMB for the projects through this network. And one of the stories I heard, which is really impressive, is that one small project organized by farmer said, I have a green project which is organic and I need money, and it posted on the platform, and within 30 minutes, it got financing. So that's how the government organized a platform involving regulators, which will put on the requirement for taxonomy and disclosure, and also attracting finance and channeling money into corporates can actually work in a real case. So I think this kind of a story can help elaborate the need for collaboration and help develop some actual format for the collaboration among key players. Now, let me wrap up my opening remark by thanking once again to Mary and Donny for taking the leadership to drive the chapter in Southeast Asia, and thank all of you for coming to join this event and supporting the GIP regional chapter work going forward. And also, thanks once again to CSIS, IFC, IFS, and the Senate Charter for supporting this event, and also the organizations that's helping this event, including IKI and Sprinkle Charity Foundation. So let me stop here, and I wish the event today a great success. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Majun, for your very insightful welcoming remarks. Now I would like to welcome Sir William Russell, former Lord Mayor of London and co-chair of GIP Steering Committee. Sir Russell is joining us through the video. Sir Russell, the screen is yours.
Good morning, everyone. Greetings from London. I'm Alderman Sir William Russell, the co-chair of GIP Steering Committee and former Lord Mayor of the City of London. I'm pleased to join you here today, albeit virtually, to witness another key milestone of GIP. During the 7th GIP Steering Committee meeting held in early September, we gathered together to discuss the progress of GIP throughout the year, which was fruitful and quite impressive. I would like to take this chance to express my heartfelt thanks to my co-chair, Dr. Majun, and all of our GIP colleagues and members for your continued guidance and support. I recall from the 5th GIP plenary meeting, we announced the GIP Southeast Asia office, and I'm glad that we all get together again today to witness the formal launch of this new office, which is also the 3rd GIP overseas office after the launch of the Central Asian office and Africa office in 2021 and 2022, respectively. As we launch the GIP Southeast Asia chapter, we embark on a journey to mobilize the financial and banking sectors of this region to confront the challenges posed by climate change. A few weeks ago, the City of London was honored to host Dr. Kao Kim Hoon, Secretary General of ASEAN, during his visit to the UK. We had discussions around smart cities and sustainable urbanization. The 3rd UK ASEAN Economic Ministers consultation meeting in August noted that the UK is the 7th largest investor in ASEAN by foreign direct investment, and the trade flows between ASEAN and the UK had risen by over 20% in 2022. ASEAN is on track to become the 4th largest economy in the world, indicating its significant role to play in addressing climate change in the global community. Green taxonomies embraced by countries like Singapore, Indonesia, Thailand, and Malaysia, along with the ASEAN Green Taxonomy, are shaping a transparent green investment environment. The establishment of carbon markets, exemplified by Vietnam's recent adoption of a law on environmental protection, and the exploration of carbon pricing schemes in the ASEAN economies, including Singapore's pioneering carbon tax, showcase a commitment to a low carbon future. However, despite these commendable efforts, a significant climate investment financing gap persists. The scale of the challenge is vast, requiring up to $1.8 trillion, an amount equivalent to 5% of the region's GDP. 2/3 of this sum must be raised domestically, emphasizing the need for strong internal financial commitments. The remaining 1/3 could be raised internationally, highlighting the importance of global cooperation. Now, this is where the green investment principles come into play. It is therefore today's event is of great significance to closer cooperation at the subnational, national, regional, and international levels, and a call to action for financial institutions, businesses, and governments across Southeast Asia. As COP28 is around the corner, discussions we will have today are aiming to ensure we remain focused on making progress towards our climate goals. Last but not least, I would like to welcome our Southeast Asian friends to join GIP, this big family, and I encourage our colleagues and members to work together with our GIP working groups and secretariats for our common green transition goal. I wish every success to our GIP ASEAN chapter. Again, thanks to Dr. Marjun and your team's dedicated work. And I'm looking forward to seeing you all in person at COP28 very soon.
Thank you to Sir William Russell for that welcoming remarks. Now I would like to invite Dr. Elka Pangestu, Chair of GIP Southeast Asia Chapter, and on behalf of CSIS Indonesia. Dr. Pangestu, the floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, partners, friends, good morning. First of all, on behalf of CSIS as the host of this event, let me first extend a warm welcome to all of you, especially to Dr. Marjun, the co-chair of the Green Investment Principles, or GIP, and others from his team, and esteemed speakers who are here, as well as the ones online, and all of you who have come to join us today to launch the Southeast Asia chapter of GIP. I am excited to be here to launch this today as the co-chair of this chapter, along with my co-chair, Pak Donny from Standard Chartered. I think that the idea for us to have a dedicated chapter for Southeast Asia was first discussed, as was mentioned, at the annual meeting last September. And it was really a vision that really resonated with us in Southeast Asia. And that's why we also was very responsive to the idea of creating this chapter. Because we are, as the moderator, MC mentioned, we are facing our challenges to meet decarbonization and net zero goals, to accelerate our climate action. So I'm really excited that today we can launch this chapter. So I'd like to extend my gratitude to our invaluable partners and organizers at CSIS, IFS, and Standard Chartered Bank, who have really worked together very hard in the last, we've worked pretty hard in the very short period of time to make this vision come to life so that we can launch the chapter today. Much has been said in terms of setting the scene of why it's important, why GIP is important, and why having the Southeast Asia chapter is very important. It does rest on the issue of the financing gap. So let me just take us back to the kind of broad level of why this addressing the financing gap is very important. I think in the last few years, we have seen a shift in terms of government's commitment, including and especially in Southeast Asia, to meet net zero, to have long-term climate and development strategies, to be more ambitious in their NDCs. And it is already in a process where we've come up with our long-term climate and development strategies. We've identified the priority sectors, and they tend to be around food and land use and energy. These are kind of the two big sectors. And we've also identified our investment needs as well as the policy changes that will need to happen to make it, to have the bankable projects, as Dr. Majun mentioned. And then there's the big discussion everywhere on where does the money come from? How do you address the financing gap? Because it will come from all sources of finance. And this is where I think blended finance and different types of instruments come in. It does have to have a government or public component, which is the government budget, as well as concessional or loans or grants from MDBs or bilaterals. And then there's all this crowding in of the private sector. And this is where, you know, it's very important to have the private investment, the financial sector, bank and non-bank, capital markets, philanthropy, and carbon trading. These are all sources of finance, which are very much part of what the GIP is trying to come up with the principles, as well as proof of concept and learning and best practices, taxonomies, and so on. So just to give you an idea of the financing gap, our MC mentioned a number, 1.8 trillion for emerging markets. For Indonesia, that number has been identified by our Minister of Finance, that we need 281 billion to fulfill our NDC target in 2030, and energy sector accounts for 87% of that amount, or 245 billion. Government budget can only finance 30%. This is our representative from the finance ministry is here. So the 70% has to come from all those other non-budget sources, including the private sector. So I think this is really the big challenge ahead for us. And to address these challenges, this is where we hope the GIP Southeast Asia chapter can play a role as an essential knowledge sharing and engagement platform, just as Dr. Majun mentioned. The platform is intended to facilitate constructive dialogue among policymakers, financial institutions, regulators, and enterprises, especially in the financial sector, as well as, I think Dr. Majun mentioned, all the services that go with it, such as carbon trading, carbon market measurements, and so on. And we hope that this regional chapter will be able to enhance our understanding of the local development context, because it's, you know, it's one thing to have these big ideas and principles, but how do you bring it down to the local development context and build capacity in countries, in the region, for policymakers, for regulators, for those in the financial sector, so that we can really have the increase in green financing, green investments to meet all those targets in the climate action. So we hope that the Southeast Asia chapter of GIP, we will focus on 3 key areas that are critical to our mission. First is to continue to build the ASEAN taxonomy for sustainable finance, or the green taxonomy, as was already mentioned, to foster a common language across diverse jurisdictions for effective communication and coordination on the labeling of economic activities and financial instruments. One of the major breakthroughs that I understand from this green taxonomy is actually having a definition of, accepting a definition for coal exit, right? Whether it's in the green box or green tier or in the amber tier. And hopefully that will help the financial sector to be able to finance transition finance for climate and for energy transition specifically. Secondly, we will concentrate on identifying the status quo, the trends, and the gaps in energy security and affordability, which remains one of the priorities for most of the countries in Southeast Asia. So a lot of it could be a focus on the energy transition, and hopefully having the pipeline of bankable. I actually prefer the word not bankable, but transformative projects. Rather, it has to be bankable, but it should also have a transformation as the outcome. And lastly, we are committed to exploring the instruments disclosure mechanisms, and the social impact of the financing for a just transition. And by doing so, we aim to create a comprehensive framework that not only addresses the financial aspects, but also considers the social implications, because it has to be people-centered. And I think everybody can agree on that. So over the course of our launch event today, you will hear from experts and thought leaders who will share insights as well as their own experience on sustainable finance, the challenges and the opportunities. Let's focus on the opportunities, not just the challenges, and the role that each of us can play in advancing the cause of green investments. So in conclusion, again, I would like to express my gratitude to all of you who have played a role in bringing this GIP Southeast Asia to fruition so that we can launch it today. This is a beginning, and I'm asking all of you to be on this journey together with us. I have a new acronym. It's called COCO. It's about collaboration and co-creation. So let's do this together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bumari, for that very insightful and always so sharp. Now I would like to invite Mr. Rino Donosepoetro, Donny, co-chair of GIP Southeast Asia Chapter.
A very good morning, the Honorable Dr. Majun, Sir William Russell, Ibu Dr. Mary Pangestu, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I won't take too much of a time because I think Dr. Majun and Ibu Mari certainly have covered quite a lot of things. But I too would want to extend a very warm welcome to everyone here for the launching of ASEAN chapter of GIP. And no doubt, I really love the spirit of Ibu Mari, actually, as our chair. And under her leadership, I'm sure actually that we can make a big impact here. But as Ibu Mari said, the work has just started. This is just the beginning. So there's actually a few other things actually that we need to do, obviously, and you'll hear a whole lot more from us. Now, just to add a little bit actually of context, I mean, I'm the Vice Chairman of Standard Chartered, responsible for the ASEAN, and the way we see it, I think what Ibu Mari has highlighted and Dr. Majun highlighted as well. So capital is probably one of the most important things in making the transition and achieving the Paris goals. I think there's a lot of numbers actually being quoted. Sir William also mentioned about a couple of trillions and so on. As Ibu Mari said, actually Indonesia has got that number specific for Indonesia in order to meet its NDC commitments. Quoted the Wednesday's UN Economics Expert Group figures for emerging markets, excluding China. They would need annually $2.4 trillion, but everything is actually about trillions of dollars. So it's actually quite big, and there is a big gap. The problem is, it's big gap. We are behind. So how do we catalyst? Everybody must collaborate. As Dr. Majun, Ibu Mari said, nobody can do it alone. But the other thing is that we need some drastic changes. And I think actually that starts from the local domestic content. And I can tell you, observing and having been involved, for example, in some initiatives like GIP, both Indonesia and Vietnam, it's bridging that in order to facilitate that flow of much needed capital from the global north to the global south that needed it the most and probably more susceptible to the impact of the climate change. I think that element of the just, how do you understand the local development context, as Ibu Mari said, is easier said than done, to be perfectly honest. I mean, it's quite complex because how do you transform and transition, while at the same time, many of the emerging economies are growing in terms of, look at the GDP growth, OECD versus the emerging markets, and it's very different, right? I mean, next year overall, it's probably a little bit muted, 2.8, 2.9, slightly lower than today on the global side. But if you look at ASEAN, it's still at very optimistic level, about 5%. Last night, Pak Peri Wahyu has just stated Bank Indonesia for Indonesia, Bank Indonesia's forecast for next year, which is growing from this year at beyond 5%. So how do you balance all of that? I think actually that's where GIP can play a big part. So wanted to quote actually my discussion with Dr. Ma yesterday, some of the things actually that we would be focusing as well, as Ibu Mari has highlighted, One is the taxonomies. I think actually it's very important. The work is still need to be done. There's some progress in ASEAN markets as we see it in terms of ASEAN taxonomy version 2, but there are some refinements that needs to be made in order that interoperability and alignment to the best possible way, actually even within the ASEAN countries, within the domestic and the ASEAN taxonomy needs to be done. I think this is actually where GIP can play a big part. The second part is that capacity building. I think Dr. Ma mentioned about, and we see it here in Southeast Asia. There's a lot of projects that, as Ibu Mari using the term, it has to be transformative, right? I mean, as a banker, maybe actually we call it, it has to be commercially viable rather than bankable. But yes, it has to be both in order to bridge that demand, right? Because the problem is the investors or lenders like ours and our coalitions such as the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero or the Net Zero Banking Alliance, we are actually under pressure to invest in sustainable finance, looking for projects. On the other hand, there's so many green projects, they're lacking in investments and looking for the lenders. I think Dr. Ma's example in Huzhou, I mean, that matching between the projects and the lenders, because the appetite are very strong on both sides. But the problem is that, how do we bridge that? How do we put them together? So that matching element is a great thing. And I think that example is something that can be applicable, as we discussed, Dr. Ma, in Southeast Asia, for that matter. Then, of course, the other capability building, how can we help the ASEAN private sectors to unlock that domestic potentials, either domestic liquidity or capability in order to access the financing, is another part of it. Last but not least, I just wanted to say, on behalf of Standard Chartered, I think we're very enthusiastic about this. We are supporting this. I think we are one of the first British bank that is supporting GIP since the inception, and we are committed to deliver this and make an impact in Southeast Asia. The next 2 days, I hope that you will benefit from the sharing. I mean, we got a number of speakers, very interesting, talking about energy transition, carbon, and taxonomies, and that starts there. Enjoy the rest of the 2 days, and thank you so much for coming in here and for all your support. We look forward to welcoming more new members to GIP and all the key stakeholders. It's an open platform, all the other stakeholders to work together with us in the going forward. Thank you.
Thank you once again to all the speeches from four distinguished co-chairs. We are now moving into keynote speeches. First, I would like to invite Dr. Boby Wahyu Hernawan to give his keynote speech. Dr. Hernawan has been with the Ministry of Finance since 1995, and in 2023, Dr. Hernawan assumed the role of head of the Center for Climate Change and Multilateral Financing Policy at the Fiscal Policy Agency. Today, he will be delivering a keynote on the need for sustainable finance in Indonesia. Floor is yours.
Good morning, our honorable speakers and moderators, Dr. Majun, Dr. Maria Pangestu, Mr. William Russell, and Bapak Rino Donosepoetro, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi, salam sejahtera bagi kita semua. Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, salam kebajikan. Ladies and gentlemen, as an emerging market and developing economy, Indonesia takes a crucial leadership role in green transition towards low carbon economy. Last year, Indonesia submitted an enhanced NDC with an increased emission reduction target. This enhanced NDC represents greater ambition compared with previous Indonesia updated NDC, with a vision to achieve net zero emission by 2060 or sooner. Indonesia realized that huge financing is needed to implement climate action to support this ambition. Based on the third biennial update report, total climate financing needs to achieve the previous NDC is approximately 281 billion US dollar by 2030. It was projected to be fulfilled by public and private investment. With this increased ambition, surely more finance is needed. In this regard, Indonesia continues to develop many initiatives, including climate budget tagging at national and regional level, fiscal incentive, green bond, green sukuk, and SDG bond, and also carbon pricing. The Indonesian government has been transforming the state budget into greener by utilizing public funds to support climate change-related projects. Cumulative climate expenditure from the national government until 2022 reaching 38 billion US dollar, contributed around 13.5 of the BUR. The government of Indonesia has also issued a number of fiscal incentives to attract more private investment in green project and green industry, including tax holiday, tax allowance, as well as facilities on VAT, import duty, and property tax. We mobilize funds through innovative financing by issuing green sukuk of 6.2 billion US dollar and our SDG bonds 577 million US dollar, both at the global and national level, which are expected to reduce around 10.6 million CO2 emission. Indonesia has also issued regulation framework to implement carbon pricing in Indonesia. This policy will utilize carbon trading and non-trade instrument to internalize the external cost of greenhouse gas emission under the polluter pay principle. In addition, Indonesia has launched carbon market through Indonesia Carbon Exchange in September 2023. Ladies and gentlemen, with many initiatives that I have mentioned before, we realize that more efforts are still needed to reach financing need of our NDC to give actual contribution to the reduce of greenhouse emission, while also keeping the pace of growth and development. In this regard, I believe that the key in achieving a growth-friendly climate action lays on transition finance. This is because transition finance involves providing financial services and products to high carbon emitting industries and also support the transition towards decarbonization. Therefore, G20 under Indonesia presidency last year commenced the transition finance framework as a guidance for development of policies and financial services to support the climate-related transition. Indonesia has also launched and continue to develop energy transition mechanism country platform as an example on how we pursue the financing for transition in energy sector in Indonesia. Indonesia is also proud to be among committed countries in energy transition. Collaborated with ADB, the government of Indonesia launched ETM during COP26 at Glasgow, aiming to accelerate retirement or repurposing of coal-fired power plants and scale up replacement clean energy technology. Indonesia then established the Indonesia ETM country platform as a blended finance framework that will mobilize financial resources and support from international partners, including multilateral and bilateral institutions, philanthropists, and private investors for a just and affordable energy transition. Indonesia continues to make progress on ETM country platform through international partnership and commitment. The governing board of the CIF Climate Investment Fund, one of the world's largest multilateral funds for climate action in developing countries, recently approved 500 million of high concessional funds to Indonesia, which will be leveraged up to 4 billion US dollar from the World Bank, ADB, and other stakeholders. The key challenge is in the involvement of private sector, where there are still no strong engagement. In considering the risk assessment, we realize that portion of low-cost financing from concessional flow of fund is crucial in determining the project return. The lower concessional pricing country platform can obtain, the more flexibility the country has to develop mechanism to ensure acceptable credit risk and a just transition for investor, lenders, and related stakeholders. Indonesia also established Just Energy Transition Partnership, JETP, with a commitment of $10 billion from public sector pledge from IPG member countries and $10 billion from private financial institutions. With international support, Indonesia will work to achieve significant targets and policies to reduce emission and support impacted communities. We also launched the Indo-JETP Secretariat by ADB on February to facilitate and coordinate technical works on this partnership. In addition, the Comprehensive Investment and Policy Plan, CIPP Indonesia JETP, has launched on 22 November 2023. This means that the roadmap of energy sector has been set, and it is time to see implementation phase. Ladies and gentlemen, the key challenge to transition finance is in the involvement of private financing for decarbonization activities. To mobilize private investment, there is a need to establish credible approach to identify and labeling transition activities to ensure their participation would not be seen as greenwashing. In this regard, Indonesia, as an ASEAN chairmanship this year, managed to deliver ASEAN Taxonomy for Sustainable Finance version 2. The ASEAN Taxonomy now has introduced coal phase out as an activity which may be classified as green or amber. In the context of our commitment of sustainable finance, it is noteworthy that recently enacted Omnibus Law, the Law Number 4/2023, on the development and strengthening of the financial sector, plays a pivotal role in fortifying our sustainable ecosystem. This law introduced three main roles for sustainable finance: encouraging private players to implement sustainable finance, strengthening the role of the government and authorities in developing sustainable finance, and fostering and integrating stakeholder cooperation in developing sustainable finance, especially between the government and the authorities. Additionally, the Omnibus Law mandates the preparation of a government regulation on Sustainable Finance Committee establishment and sustainable taxonomy. Ladies and gentlemen, however, as we embark on this transformative path, the stark reality remains that the financing gap for climate solution in Southeast Asia is substantial, estimated at around $1.8 trillion. Two-thirds of this amount must be raised domestically, emphasizing the urgency for rapid mobilization of private funds. Our efforts, though commendable, require a collective, coordinated approach at all levels: subnational, national, regional, and international. Yet, the journey to mobilize private funds encounter formidable challenge on both the supply and demand side. There exists a bottleneck marked by a lack of economic incentive. Financial institutions, critical actors in this mobilization, often do not regard green credit lines as attractive business opportunities. The absence of clear economic benefits can deter them from actively participating in sustainable finance initiatives. Moreover, another supply-side challenge lies in the lack of capacity within financial institutions. Many lack of necessary expertise to assess environmental risks, particularly those associated with green investment. This capacity gap poses a hindrance to the effective evaluation and deployment of funds toward environmentally sustainable projects. Additionally, risk perception stands as a significant barrier. Financial institutions may perceive investment credits for renewable energy facilities or energy efficiency as particularly risk-enforced. Overcoming this perception hurdle is crucial to unlocking the potential for financial projects that contribute to the region's climate goals. Ladies and gentlemen, today we gather here to witness the launch of Green Investment Principle Southeast Asia Chapter. This initiative is another regional collaboration among financial and banking institutions to overcome the challenge of sustainable finance. We appreciate these concerted efforts and look forward to see meaningful impact for green financing opportunities. Let's engage in enriching discussion and wholeheartedly participate during this event. Wishing you all have a pleasant morning and fruitful discussion, and thank you for your valued presence. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Dr. Hernawan, for your keynote speech. We are now moving on to Dr. Jin Zhongxia, Director General of International Department of People's Bank of China, who is joining us online. Before being the Director General of International Department at People's Banks of China, he was the Executive Director for China at the International Monetary Fund. Today, Dr. Jin will be delivering a keynote on the role of central banks in solving sustainable finance challenges in ASEAN. Dr. Jin, the screen is yours.
Umari and Donny, Mr. Nazara, and the ladies and the gentlemen. Good morning. First, let me extend my warm congratulations on the launch of the GIP Southeast Asia Chapter. As one of the major developments following the recently concluded Belt and Road Forum hosted by President Xi personally, this is a pivotal event. I'm happy to join you today in celebrating this latest milestone achieved by the GIP. The GIP has evolved into a globally recognized initiative since its inception in 2018, reflecting the appeal of our shared commitment to sustainable development. The GIP has evolved into a globally recognized initiative since its, to take the impact of the GIP to a new level. Working together with partners in the Southeast Asia region is crucial. Our shared vision for sustainability is demonstrated in the cooperation on major green infrastructure, such as the high-speed railway system connecting Jakarta and Bandung, the fast-growing renewable energy system, and the electric vehicle manufacturing. The remarkable progress in green and sustainable financing in the region is both commendable and exemplary. Green loans have emerged as a significant feature in the ASEAN market, accounting for 23% of the region's loans, as reported by the Climate Bonds Initiative. The development of an ASEAN taxonomy on sustainable finance in 2021 further underscores this commitment. In particular, Indonesia has been a pioneer in actively integrating sustainability into its financial agenda, as highlighted by the strong growth in green and sustainability-related financial products. The announcement and the establishment of the Southeast Asia chapter marks a new era of our collaboration, as it is a clear indication of GIP members' collective commitment to this region. I hope the chapter will serve as a dynamic platform for exchanging ideas and best practices, connecting stakeholders, and facilitating the transition towards a sustainable and low-carbon economy. I'm also happy to see that over the next 1.5 days, the Sustainable Finance Forum will cover critical topics such as green taxonomy, carbon markets, financing green products, and facilitating the energy transition. these are the elements that we at the PBOC also consider essential in implementing our green finance strategy to support our national goals for carbon peaking and neutrality. I look forward to lively and fruitful conversations. Before concluding, let me say that the launch of the chapter is a call to action. It brings a new opportunity to strengthen our collaboration. I'm sure that together we will seize this momentum to deliver lasting positive changes for the region and beyond towards a greener and more sustainable future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jin, for your keynote speech. Last but not least, I would like to invite Ms. Fransiska Oei to deliver her keynote speech. She is currently serving as the Director of Compliance, Corporate Affairs, and Legal and Corporate Secretary at CIMB Niaga. She oversees good corporate governance and sustainability and CSR at CIMB Niaga. Please welcome Ms. Oei to deliver Sustainable Financing by Banks and the Importance of the Sustainable Finance Taxonomy. Ms. Oei, the floor is yours.
Distinguished Majun, Chairman of China Green Finance Committee and the Green Investment Principle Co-Chair, Mr. William Brussels, Ibu Mari Elka Pangestu, Bapak Rino, and also Zhongxia, I think is on the line, distinguished speakers and invitees. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. First of all, I would like to congratulate on the launching of the Green Investment Principle Southeast Asia Chapter. It is really a great honor and privilege for me to have a chance to be here today, as we are all pleased to welcome this launching. The principle of the Green Investment Principle are aligned with our objective, including embedding sustainability into corporate governance, understanding environmental, social, and governance risk, disclosing environmental information, enhancing communication with stakeholders, utilizing green financial instruments, adopting a green supply chain management, and building capacity through collective action. Hopefully, the Green Investment Principle Southeast Asia Chapter will put more spirit into and complementing Indonesia's sustainable finance ecosystem, as well as collaborating with the stakeholders, including Perbanas. I'm here actually on behalf of Perbanas. My CV was mentioned, my real job basis, in CIMB Niaga, but I'm here actually representing Perbanas. In this regard, together, we can facilitate even wider positive impact, including enhancing capacities, supporting transition finance, facilitating just and affordable energy transition, and by the end, achieving Indonesia net zero target in 2060. Slide 1. Ladies and gentlemen, as an association that oversees national private banks, Perbanas view that implementing sustainability, especially on sustainable finance, is very essential. In Indonesia, national banks have started implementing sustainable finance since the launch of OJK Regulation 60, POJK 04/2017, which is now already being amended by POJK 18/2023, and also the launch of OJK Regulation number 51, POJK 03/2017, concerning sustainable finance. POJK number 51/2017 apply not only for banks, but also gradually toward financial institutions, issuers, and also public companies. Even though Indonesia already committed toward Paris Agreement in 2016, when this POJK regulation launched in the end of, at the end of the 2017, sustainable finance was still something unfamiliar and new to most of the banks in Indonesia. Since then, commencing with the large national banks and foreign banks, the journey started to increase awareness about sustainability as well as implementing sustainable finance. Led by the preparation of the Sustainable Finance Action Plan, which is, we call it RAKB, banks started developing strategic plan to develop sustainable finance products and or services, and also developing capacity building. This is something that the previous speaker that mentioned about capacity building. I agree with that, because capacity building is something that what we really banks need. We actually lack of understanding about sustainable finance, so developing capacity building is something very essential for us. And also, we actually performance internal adjustment toward organization structure. We change the risk management, governance, and or internal policies. And continued by publication of the sustainability report. For some of the banks, sustainability report is also something new. Probably some of other banks, this is something that already been done, but with the POJK 51, we enhanced the sustainability report. Despite the level of the sustainable finance implementation are still varied across banks, financial service institutions, issuers, or public companies in Indonesia, this journey is surely a series of continuous improvement. For instance, banks in Indonesia succeeded in identifying and reporting the sustainable finance portfolio, which is required by OJK, issuing several sustainable finance product and program, such as green sustainability bonds, sustainability-linked loan, green mortgage, sustainable finance, and many others. Several banks have also appointed director and established sustainability working unit who are responsible for the implementation of sustainable finance in their respective organizations. Recently, in 2023, 11 banks been appointed by OJK to carry out the climate risk stress testing pilot project. Close discussion with these 11 banks are conducted by OJK till to date. Furthermore, in August 2023, OJK issued POJK number 14, 2023, regarding carbon trading, as Bapak mentioned earlier, and followed by the Indonesian Carbon Exchange launching in September 2023. This entire journey from 2017 to date have been a learning curve for all of us, especially toward green financing, climate risk, and later about RSISSB 1 and 2. Slide 2. In this regard, bank also identifies some opportunities. For example, potential climate investment. IFC estimated potential climate investment in Indonesia at more than 274 billion USD by 2030. And also we see that enthusiasm of carbon unit purchase in the market. The first carbon trading session in Indonesia saw more than 450,000 tons of carbon units traded. The increase of green sustainable products and also awareness and demand. As of 2020, Indonesia has the second largest sustainable finance market in Asia, with over $5 billion in issuances since 2018. The increase of market preference to use environmentally friendly products despite higher price. Illuminate Asia mentioned that around 6 out of 10 Indonesians, which is represent 58%, agree that they choose products based on whether they are sustainable or environmentally friendly. This is slightly higher than the global average, which is 51%, but still behind compared to other markets such as China, Bolivia, Peru, and Switzerland. Similarly, around 7 out of 10 Indonesians claim to give a lot of consideration to sustainability when shopping for groceries. This is one of the highest scores globally, ahead of countries like USA, Japan, and Australia, and ahead of the global average, which is 52%. Stronger collaboration between banks and its clients to achieve climate action targets. Also, we can see that there is a stronger collaboration, which shown in the increased market demand for sustainable finance products, such as sustainability-linked loan, green loan, sustainability-linked trade, and also trade financing. We are also aware that the institutions committed to implement sustainable finance will receive positive perception from investor driving institutions to have programs that are in line with net zero emission target. The rising number of green investors. According to the Bloomberg Intelligence, $35 trillion in global assets in 2020 were managed based on environmental, social, and governance consideration. Such amount is expected to reach 50 trillion USD by 2025. And this is actually really show that a lot of benefit or a lot of challenges, or sorry, not a lot of benefits and also opportunities facing banks. However, on the other hand, also mentioned by earlier speakers, banking industry also identified several challenges that require collaboration from stakeholders, such as uneven understanding of POJK 51/2017 and lack of understanding of Indonesia green taxonomy. The lack of expertise, also mentioned before, in assessing and analyzing green projects, and also relatively high risk of green financing because it's also long-term. There is a mismatch between banks' financing and funding tenor. Hence, banks really need support, incentive or guarantee from the government or regulators on green project. The risk also, we can see also there is also a risk of greenwashing that will significantly affect banks' reputation. We also still need further encouragement from stakeholders to create value proposition for sustainable finance implementation and stronger collaboration among government agencies. With all of this, we are hopefully that launching of the Green Investment Principle Southeast Asia Chapter will unlock the invaluable support needed by banks and other stakeholders to improve the green financing, especially toward energy transition. Distinguished participants, we also would like to highlight the Indonesian Green Taxonomy, which was launched by President Bapak Jokowi in January 2022. Indonesian Green Taxonomy is the classification of economic activities supporting the effort in protecting and managing environment, as well as to mitigate and adapting to climate change. With the Indonesian Green Taxonomy, stakeholders will have a clearer guidance in categorizing the economic activities. Since it also serves as the guidance toward green taxonomy transformation, thus it may have positive impact on the environment and social aspect. Indonesian Green Taxonomy is also expected to encourage sustainable financing support toward Indonesian achievement of net zero emission target. Since June 2022, start by several banks have been requested by OJK to carry out a pilot project to classify and report their financing portfolio according to the Indonesia Green Taxonomy. Within its journey, the taxonomy is also flexible and dynamic. It aligns with the investment strategies and patterns. It is also adaptable with technology, science, new activities and data, as well as input from the industry and banking sectors. Hence, we are all aware, tadi Bapak also mentioned, at this very moment, OJK is in the process of revising Indonesia Green Taxonomy into Indonesia Sustainable Taxonomy. The transformation from Indonesia Green Taxonomy into Indonesia Sustainable Taxonomy is accommodating several things, including but not limited to consideration of several supporting and relevant policies such as ENDC, net zero emission roadmap, sectoral emission limit, and so on. The strengthen also the changes regarding that the strengthening of social aspect, such as human rights, employment, gender equality, poverty elevation within taxonomy. Also, there is the new green taxonomy, Indonesia taxonomy. Also, we can see that inclusion of qualitative and quantitative aspect to clarify their classification boundaries. So it may minimize multiple interpretation as well as the risk of greenwashing. The support toward Indonesia carbon exchange. Also, we can see that, that the carbon trading also will be in that Indonesia taxonomy to defer the assessment and classification between corporate and versus MSME financing. Thus, banking industry welcome this transformation mentioned above. In fact, this transformation also accommodating the national banks or Perbanas input through discussion and so on with OJK. In our view, we are sincerely hopeful that Indonesia's sustainable taxonomy may accommodate the needs of not only the Indonesian economy, but also the alignment with the regional green taxonomy, so that the Indonesia sustainable taxonomy will maintain and strengthen its credibility globally. Ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude this speech by once again gladly congratulating the launching of the Green Investment Principles Southeast Asia Chapter. Also, I wish to share that our concerted efforts are needed to advance the implementation of sustainable finance in Indonesia, not only to support the transition finance facilitated just and affordable energy transition, but also to achieve Indonesia net zero target by 2060. I thank you for attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Fransiska Oei, for your keynote speech. We are now moving into the peak of our event, but we'll be conditioning the stage for now. Forum after lunch at 1 p.m. sharp. We will see you. We will see all of you after lunch. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to today's discussion. I hope you all had a really nice lunch break. So today, now we'll be moving into a closed door event. This will be the first roundtable sort of discussion that we'll be having. This is session 1, which is the increasing use of sustainable finance taxonomy does not go without exception to Southeast Asia. ASEAN recently launched its taxonomy for sustainable finance, which aims to serve as a common language for sustainable finance across the 10 member states. As the region aims to simultaneously boost economic development and environmental sustainability, the taxonomy plays a pivotal role in guiding the financial industry and businesses toward greener investments. Meanwhile, the International Platform for Sustainable Finance, IPSF, has also released a common ground taxonomy based on the Chinese and the EU taxonomies and initiated its second phase to integrate taxonomies from more jurisdictions. This session will focus on development of taxonomies and potential alignment to facilitate cross-border capital flows. And I would like to warmly welcome our moderator, Dr. Majun, the co-chair of GIP Steering Committee, to come up. But I would also like to invite Bapak Henry Rialdi, head of OJK Integrated Financial Services Sector Surveillance and Policy Department. Also, Mr. Adam Ning, Asia Pacific Lead Greening Financial Regulation Initiative, WWF, and Bapak Rosani Osman to join today's discussion. Thank you.
Welcome back to this closed-door session on taxonomy. We have 4 people in the room and 2 more online. I guess our moderator has introduced the speakers on the stage, and also we have Ling Shu Hui from the MAS online. Shu Hui, are you online? And we also have Mashtaq Kapasi from ICMA, who is also online, supposed to be online.
I am.
Okay, that's Shu
Thank
Hui,
you, Dr.
right?
Ma.
And Mashtaq? Yeah.
Yes, I'm here.
Great.
Hope you can hear me.
Thank you all very much. I do hear you, but now when I call you, maybe you have to speak louder.
Okay.
So now let me probably take advantage of my being the moderator and say a few words on taxonomy. I personally been working on taxonomy for the past nearly a decade. I in China led the drafting of the first green bond taxonomy, and recently in the last 4 years I co-chaired this common ground taxonomy working group, which is created by Europe and China. And now during these phases, my view is that the taxonomy can be used at least in 3 major ways. Number 1, it's used to label green financial products, which is probably the purpose of many of the ASEAN countries developing their taxonomy as well. Now, without official taxonomy, it's very easy to end up with too many unofficial taxonomy. Then everybody label their products using their own standard. This will end up with a lot of greenwashing. That's why the taxonomy, especially the authentic official ones, is important in preventing some of these products to get into greenwashing risk. The second usage is what I call disclosure. In the Chinese system, we started actually having a simple taxonomy for the banking system 2013. That's 10 years ago. And over time, we revised it to something more sophisticated. But every year, the regulator requires the commercial banks to report the amount of green loans they extend, and the percentage of the green loans in total loans, and also the growth of green loans. So these information are very important. They have to disclose to the regulator, and sometimes now they are all disclosing to the general public. And the third usage is really performance measurement and incentive allocation. Now, once you have all these data available, then it's very clear which bank is doing better than the other, right, in terms of growth of green loans, percentage of green loans, and so on. And now the central bank in China, they put these indicators into a performance measurement matrix, which is called Green Banking Performance Measure. And one of the measures is the percentage of green loans you have. If you have a high number, then you get a good rating. And the second measure is the growth of green loans. If it's higher, then you get a better rating. And once the green banking rating is higher, then you get some unexpected incentive. For example, next time you apply new products license, and the central bank will give you earlier if your performance is better. And more importantly, there are financial incentives given to these banks which have done well on green loans and maybe other green assets, including green bonds. For example, last few years, the central bank came up with a what we call decarbonization facility, which is a very cheap source of funding through commercial banks to the green projects. And the allocation is actually partially based on taxonomy, because if you are done well, and I will likely to pick you as the bank to execute my cheap funding re-lending program. And that's actually a very financially rewarding incentive for these banks. Again, this is based on the taxonomy because taxonomy generates the data that can evaluate the performance of the banks. So these are the type of usage which I think are quite relevant maybe for this region as well. Now moving on to the common ground taxonomy. The issue is that back 4 years ago, I sort of foresee too many taxonomies in the world. And 2 years ago, I heard there are 200 taxonomies already. And now it's probably 300 taxonomies, which means that if every country has a taxonomy, you end up with new barriers to cross-border green capital flow, because every country has a different definition of green activities. And if you want to issue a green bond in this country and selling in another country, you have to go through a few rounds of different verification, and it's more costly. So to overcome this problem, at that time we proposed to the IPSF, International Sustainable Finance Platform, that we need to create a common taxonomy between China and Europe. These are the two large green finance markets. If we can agree on something that's a common language, then potentially it could be used by other jurisdictions as well as a building block. So I had the honor to co-chair this common ground taxonomy working group starting from 2000, middle of 2000, and last 3 years, we created this common ground taxonomy already. And this taxonomy is now being used by a lot of Chinese issuers issuing international green bonds. They put a sticker saying this is CGT or common ground taxonomy aligned products. Then you only need to have one verifier verifying against the CGT, then it can be sold essentially everywhere. And this has been successful experience of creating a taxonomy, use it for cross-border transactions. And now in China, we're labeling some of existing or legacy green bonds against the common ground taxonomy. The latest exercise we did is more than 200 green bonds are labeled as CGT aligned. And suddenly these 200 green bonds become investable by the international investment community. So this experience we had in creating some interconnectivity between different markets, and I thought that experience might be useful for thinking about interoperability within the ASEAN region as well, using a sort of a common taxonomy as a building block for different taxonomies in different countries. So with that as an opening, I'd like to start with Henry, who is the head of the OJK Integrated Financial Services Sector Surveillance and Policy Department, which is the long name of the department that's in charge of green finance and taxonomy, to give us an overview of the Indonesian taxonomy, how it's being used, and how you envision its development in the future.
Thank you, Dr. Ma. Thank you very much. Our taxonomy, I think the objective is similar to yours in the sense that we only started developing the taxonomy in 2022. This is the initial start of the development of the taxonomy. Our primary goals is similar to what you experienced, that in a sense, prior to the development of the taxonomy, the issue of green financing has been quite a hot topic. Prior to the taxonomy, we've developed general standards in a sense, to classify which area are considered green investment or not. But in operation, it's quite difficult. Many standards are adopted in terms of labeling what is green instrument and what not. So this is the reason we developed the taxonomy themselves. The taxonomy was developed in coordination with various ministries. I think more than 15 ministries. And it encompasses a large sector. In the implementation of the taxonomy, you also recognize the importance of data, as Dr. Ma said. So with the issuance of the taxonomy themselves, we also enacted a pilot project in which banks, several banks are required to submit data, in a sense to, for us as a regulator to distinguish the amount of what is considered green investment, but in a sense also to tailor certain kind of incentive, because incentive is required in terms of development of the green finance area. But from our experience in 2022, we started looking at what we could improve in terms of the taxonomy. One of the issues is that we encompass a large amount of sectors. Well, it's good in a sense, but a level of detail in terms of technical set of standards are required in terms of for the economy to be credible. To include too much sectors, we found ourselves in terms of difficulties in establishing technical criteria to address this issue if we involve too many sectors. That's why we revise our approach in the revision. We are currently going to revise the taxonomy. Our approach will be different in a sense. We would see what priority area are needed in terms of the usage of the taxonomy itself. We try to align it with the sectors which is stated in the national NDCs. So currently, the revision would focus on the energy sectors. The revision also consider what has been developed in the ASEAN taxonomy. We use that as a framework in the revision of the Indonesian taxonomy to address the issues of interoperability, in a sense, because this is quite important. But of course, several adjustments are needed in terms of adapting it to the Indonesian condition. But the overall framework themselves, we try to align it with what has been developed in the ASEAN region. And also what we found from our experience is that the taxonomy themselves is only applicable to large institutions, to corporations. While that's fine, but we also need to address the issue of small, medium-scale enterprises, in which small and medium-scale enterprise could involve themselves, could basically be open to investment capital in terms of green financing or sustainable financing. So this the area of MSME is one of the major also revision in terms of the taxonomy that we are currently developing. Thank you.
Hello. Yeah. Thank you, Henry. You mentioned one thing, which is the development taxonomy is very costly because if you involve too many sectors, and you need to have all these sectors specialists understanding the technology, the thresholds, and so on. But one way, I guess, the international community can help lower the cost of development is to pass on some other taxonomy to them, so they can just cut and paste the majority of it. This is the experience we had in helping a few other Central Asian countries. For example, back 4 or 5 years ago, my team helped Mongolia and Kazakhstan in developing taxonomy. Basically, I was telling them, you take the Chinese one, which we made it in English, and you cut and paste, whatever you want. If the sector is available, you keep it. Otherwise, you remove it. And if you want to change the thresholds, you change it. So that can reduce the time of development from 3 years to 6 months. Now, that's just one experience of, a benefit of international knowledge sharing. Then it was the Sri Lanka and Pakistan, which also we were involved in helping. At that time, the Common Ground Taxonomy is ready. So I showed them, this is a CGT, which is the consensus version between Europe and China. You take it and cut and paste. So for example, Sri Lanka and the Pakistan's largest bank, they took the CGT as a main building block, and they added just a few items on top of that, which is reflecting the local conditions. Again, I think it saved a lot of time and cost of developing a taxonomy. Now, this is very applicable to smaller countries. When the situation is not that complex, they only use a subset of the industries of a larger taxonomy. Of course, for Indonesia, it may be different because your economy is big, you're complex, and have new activities. Indeed, you need to have your own manpower to develop the major part of taxonomy. So let me move on to MAS Lin Shuhui. Shuhui, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me well?
Yeah, if you can tell us a bit of the Singaporean taxonomy and how it's interacted with the ASEAN taxonomy. And in fact, I guess you were involved in this participation in CGT as well, right? Common Ground Taxonomy. So all these are the issues that you can talk a little bit in the first round. Shu Hui.
Yes, sure. Thanks, Dr. Machin, and thank you so much for this opportunity to speak at the panel today. Maybe just an introduction about the work that we are doing at MAS on two fronts. First, the MAS together with our industry representatives in the financial sector, we have developed, and we are really in the final stages of the Singapore Asia taxonomy that will be shortly launched at COP28 this weekend. So I'm happy to say that we are nearly there. And a key feature of this taxonomy is that it encompasses a transition category. And given the need to properly contextualize transition in the ASEAN region, where there's a progressive shift towards net zero taking place alongside economic development, population growth, as well as the rising energy demands. So, and that's the key focus of key feature of the Singapore Asia taxonomy. At the same time, on a broader regional level, MAS is also the vice chair of the ASEAN Taxonomy Board, and we have been working with our ASEAN colleagues to shape the ASEAN Taxonomy for green and transition activities under the PLUS standard. So these are the two key pieces that we are doing in terms of taxonomy work. And as Dr. Machin also alluded earlier, that the MAS is also seeking to achieve interoperability given with the proliferation of other international taxonomies. So besides having to kind of ensure that the ASEAN taxonomy and the Singapore taxonomy are not too different, that we are also working to ensure that the Singapore Asia taxonomy is also met under the Common Ground taxonomy, and that's under the IPSF platform. So that's kind of an introduction for now.
Thank you, Shu Hui. Let me now move on to Mashta from ICMA. Now, I know ICMA has done a great job on green bonds. You were the pioneer in creating the green bond taxonomy. Not really taxonomy, it was a principle, but also it's very much used in conjunction by many countries and issuers with taxonomy. So can you tell us a little bit of the relationship between the principles and the taxonomies, and to what extent they're complementary to each other, and how you see the new taxonomy coming up in ASEAN to facilitate capital market transactions?
Yeah, absolutely. And Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much for having me here on this panel. I'm really honored. And thank you, Dr. Ma, for the great question. First of all, I may have to just maybe be a bit more modest about ICMA's role, because the green bond principles, while I do think that they were in some ways the the first really industry standard that was widely adopted in the sustainable finance world. This was not something that ICMA necessarily wrote from scratch. We just served as the secretariat and the trade association that helped to bring all the different stakeholders in the market together to come up with standards that were credible, usable, and international. And actually, we were talking about greenwashing as if it just became an issue a couple of months ago, but actually greenwashing was an issue 12 years ago. And there was worries about the mislabeling of climate bonds or green bonds. And so that was a whole idea the Green Bond Principles together. Now, I'm sure many of you are already familiar with the Green Bond Principles. If you're not, I really encourage you to just go to our website and download it. It's only about a few pages long and very informative. But one thing you'll notice is that the Green Bond Principles, which are the market standard for 98% of labeled green bonds globally right now, what they do is they really prescribe more of the process and the disclosure around what defines a green bond. So in particular, to have a valid green bond under the ICMA principles, you have to use the funds for greener environmental projects. You have to have a management of those proceeds. You have to have a good process for selecting the projects, and then you have to have reporting both of the way the money is used, but also of the impact. Now, what you notice there, and also you have to, generally speaking, have a green bond framework and an external review. What you might notice there, in terms of the green bond principles, is that the green bond principles themselves are not very specific about what is green, about what is an acceptable project. And there's a good reason for that. The main reason is that ICMA and the market participants who put together the green bond principles are not necessarily the experts on climate. We're not necessarily the ones who decide what is best, what is green, what is environmental. Another reason is that this definition can actually change over time. So we've seen shifts in market and global sentiment over the last few years, and still some disagreements about things like clean coal, carbon capture and storage, ammonia and other technologies that can be used for transition, nuclear energy, right? These sorts of things are not necessarily ones on which there is global agreement. So the ICMA Green Bond Principles declined to take a view on this. And the other thing, of course, implicit in what I just said, is that there are differences of opinion across different markets and across different nationalities. So the reason I'm explaining all of that is to make the point that the Green Bond Principles themselves do not go into much detail and are not very prescriptive about telling you what is a proper green or environmental or social investment and how to evaluate that. Therefore, you need another standard. You need another way of looking at that. And of course, we rely on the market to do that, but a very good way to have a credible analysis of what is green is through different taxonomies. And the people who make the taxonomies, Soei Hui, yourself and your team, Dr. Ma, all of the experts that are involved in making taxonomies, they are much more qualified to think about what is the appropriate measure for what is really good enough to be in a green bond. And there are different ways of looking at that, right? You can look at it in terms of category of project. You can look at it in terms of type of technology. You can look at it in terms of the actual impact by certain measures. You can also look at it in terms of the progression over time, right? The pathway in terms of that investment or project. And these are questions, frankly, which are not part of the Green Bond Principles. These are separate questions. So in that way, on a very conceptual level, it's very important to have taxonomies. Now, I'll just make one more point, which is on a practical level. So how would taxonomies be used with green bonds? And we can go into this a little bit more. But basically, my personal view, having experience with both the EU, with China, with Common Ground Taxonomy, and I've been involved in some of the industry consultations on the ASEAN taxonomy as well, we feel this can actually be a very useful tool for green bond issuers. And how is that? Well, again, the green bond principles, they don't tell you exactly what is green or what is not green. They give you an idea, they don't tell you exactly. What a company issuer can do if they're coming out of ASEAN is they can use the ASEAN taxonomy to classify their investments or to evaluate their own corporate strategy. if they're doing an SLB or engaging in transition finance. And if they do that, then they will be able to tell international investors, look, I'm already adhering, I'm already in line with a very robust, very well thought out regional, not even national, but regional taxonomy that proves that I am up to best class standards in terms of my sustainability, whether it be investments or my corporate strategy. And that is a very good way to build credibility in the international space because the ASEAN taxonomy already has international credibility. If investors think the ASEAN taxonomy is not good enough, perhaps the foundation framework is a bit of a lower standard, that's fine, they can make that decision. If they feel that a plus standard is good enough, that's great. They can use that as a benchmark. But it becomes a very good way, a very good kind of label or shortcut to immediately inform global investors and users that you are already in line with a very good regional standard. So I'll stop there for now, but happy to answer more questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mashtaq. I think you elaborate very well the complementary nature between taxonomy and the green bond principle. Essentially, I guess you're saying that if you use both the principle and the taxonomy, it will further enhance the credibility of the green financial instruments. In fact, this discussion, which I sort of organized during the G20, also involved whether the two things, principle and taxonomy, they're complementary to each other, or they are actually should have used separately. That was a conversation back probably 2 years ago when we discussed the roadmap of G20 and also more recently discussing the transition finance framework. There were two views. One is saying, let's define green sustainable activities using taxonomy. And the other view is that let's define this within some principles. And at the end of the day, I think the smarter people agree that we can use both at the same time, which will further enhance the credibility of the identified activity as green or sustainable. Now, back to our stage. I'll ask Adam from the WWF. You are based in Malaysia, right? You've been working with the Malaysian authority on Malaysian taxonomy. Also, you were involved in ASEAN taxonomy. So can you just say a little bit of your experience in this circle and maybe tell us a little bit about interoperability between a country taxonomy and a regional taxonomy?
Sure. So good afternoon, and first of all, thank you, Dr. Ma, and also the Institute of Finance and Sustainability, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, and then Ibu Mari and Pak Rino and everyone here. I know it's after lunch, so when the carbohydrate kicks in, so we may need to have a matrix or threshold as to how much carbo before we get drowsy. Well, coming on a serious note, I've not been directly involved in the ASEAN taxonomy work, but as you know, the Sustainable Finance Institute is the so-called secretariat, and we've been consulted on a few occasions. So there are basically two approaches that you could enhance interoperability. One is the adopt and adapt approach. So if I would, for some this may be a new term, but the adopt or adapt approach is basically to look into the taxonomy design features. So in a taxonomy, there are essentially some common features that you can either adapt or adopt, right? So for example, if you look into those aspects that needs to be common or jurisdictions, different countries will have to agree, will be the metrics, for example. So because if you start using different metrics, some use intensity, some use absolute number, some use a totally different metric, then it will be quite chaotic, right? But however, I think we could, with the common metrics or standardized metrics, the threshold could be different. Taking into account just transition, contextualizing to the local economic development, as well as what Pak Henry mentioned, SMEs and local economic priorities. I think the threshold, while having said that, as an international organization, we will of course advocate for science-based threshold, the threshold that needs to be aligned with certain pathways. I think our colleague from ICMA mentioned about pathways, sectoral pathways. But also the threshold would need to be also forward-looking. So if the threshold is based on backward data, just like in climate scenario analysis or stress test, I think one of the key challenges is how do you not just do forecasting, but how do you even use the right reference scenarios? Because scenarios is the state of the world in which climate interacts with various socio-economic, technological development. So I think having that forward-looking dimension, I think is also something that jurisdiction needs to agree on, because it's also a bit not homogeneous if one country were to use certain scenarios and another country use different scenarios. Again, it's easier said than done. The other component is to basically look into adaptation. So adopt is the adoption of what is common design features. But when you talk about adapt here, it's about adaptation to the local context. And this concept known as equivalence mapping, right? So in the case of, let's say, EIA is a very common requirement when you do project finance and exploration and so on, where you need to conduct environmental impact assessment. So there's of course a common denominator, but different countries would have different requirements. This is part of regulation, part of legal requirement, but there's also a lot of backlash against the transparency and the process in which an EIA is being done. So, so an example of, so EIA is one example of how equivalence mapping could be done. So say, for example, the EU designate, let's say, India, for example, to be a designated country of equivalence mapping, which means that, this is hypothetical, I'm just making it up. Let's say EU recognizes India's EIA as good, right? As at par with certain standards that EU has. So that would promote interoperability. But however, if let's say another country, let's take COP in Abu Dhabi, UAE, for example, the EIA is perceived by the EU standards as not up to the expectation. Therefore, it will not be part of the equivalence mapping, and therefore, maybe certain additional requirements will need to be added on top of the EIA conducted by the UAE requirements. So I think these are, so in summary, three keywords: adopt, adapt, and with an equivalence mapping perspective.
No, it looks to me that you think this is your version of interoperability, which is different countries' taxonomy can use the same description of activities, but with different thresholds or different sort of additional criteria. And my understanding of interoperability is from another angle. If all these countries have the same building block, meaning these activities, they use the same standard, but additional activities up to the country. And this main building block is identical to all countries. And I see the benefit of that, which is facilitating cross-border transactions of financial products that's supporting these common denominated activities. So if you issue green bonds only in this building block, then it can be traded anywhere. It should require only one verification, against one criteria. And at least we can call this so interoperability for cross-border transactions. For pure domestic transaction created, projects domestically originated, bought by domestic investors, we probably don't need that much interoperability for the moment, right? You can use a pure sort of additional local standards. That's my sort of a perspective, but of course we can have many different perspectives on what interoperability actually means. Now let me come to Rosani, who used to be the World Bank Senior Financial Specialist on green finance. He just retired, early retirement, and he's going to join the CASI, which I mentioned earlier, Capacity Building Alliance for Sustainable Investment, in the coming few months. So Rosani, you've been involved in Malaysian taxonomy development from the World Bank angle, and also you know something about the regional taxonomy. So your perspective, please.
Thank you, Dr. Ma. It was very interesting to hear your views, Adam's views on interoperability, and see how your views also differ a little bit. So that reflects the challenge, when even the way we think about interoperability is also a little bit different. And then also, how do we make all the different taxonomies in the different countries operate together and in complementing each other rather than competing with each other. So one of the things that I was working on when I worked on the Malaysian taxonomy, I just want to emphasize again, the challenges of working with different taxonomies is that you've got different countries with different views on how to run their own taxonomies. Just as an example, before I touch into how the taxonomy was built, is that just looking in the ASEAN region alone, we have the regional taxonomy, the ASEAN taxonomy. Thailand has its taxonomy. Malaysia has 2 different taxonomies, one for the capital markets, one for the banking sector. Singapore has a taxonomy. Indonesia has a taxonomy. Philippines is developing their own taxonomy. The key is that this is just one region. Imagine the whole world, like what you said, you're going to have a few hundred different taxonomies in the world. So when you're developing a taxonomy, it's important to have some commonality so that when you look at the different taxonomies across the different regions and different countries, there are some similarities that you can understand. And as an investor, when you're coming in to look at the country, you look at one region and you find that there are similarities, and the similarities are enough that it lowers your barrier to entry, to make it easier for you to make a decision whether this is a green investment or green project or this is not. So when we worked on the Malaysian taxonomy, we tried to incorporate elements of the EU taxonomy, elements of the common ground taxonomy, to try to make it sort of compatible on a big picture scale, as well as look at the ASEAN taxonomy itself, because you don't want it to be too divergent from the regional taxonomy. And then I also work on the early stages of the Philippine taxonomy, the Philippine green taxonomy, and it was from the very beginning, we were trying to encourage that taxonomy to also be similar to the ASEAN taxonomy, to other taxonomies in the region, so that you won't have a very vastly differing taxonomy. And like you said, if you have a common ground between the regional countries, especially, for example, if you use the ASEAN taxonomy as a base, and then you develop some national-based specialties, like something that's important to you as a country, and you lay it on top, then it allows that the base to be compatible with each other. And it's only then the specifics of something that's national priority might be a bit different. As an example, is that in the Philippines, for example, there's a strong focus on SME. So they want to have a special focus on SME in their taxonomy. In Malaysia, the SRI taxonomy, they want to have a focus on social. So they put something in there on the social part. So every country will have something that they want to put in from their own point of view. But at the very base, the base part should be relatively compatible to allow commonalities between the countries to show, rather than so that you can bring everyone together rather than split them apart.
Yeah, I can think about another analogy of the common ground taxonomy for international usage. It's like an international driver's license. Once you have this driver's license, you can go anywhere to drive. But at the same time, you may have a domestic driver license, which could be just another sticker on your international license, so you can both drive internationally and in the country. So this is, another, I guess, easier to understand the version of the interoperability. Now, we have everybody speaking for first round, but I do spot 2 major issues which we have really not touched upon, but important. One is SME, which Henry mentioned earlier. Most of taxonomy are project-based, and only large companies are able to create these projects. So essentially, the taxonomy are being used by large companies for large financiers. And how do we deal with SMEs, which only probably can be identified at the company level, whether it's green or not, ESG higher or lower? And how do we integrate that into the green finance family? That's one question. The second one is transition taxonomy, which Shu Hui has mentioned. You integrated that into your Singaporean taxonomy, but you label them as amber, right? Maybe a little bit more on that, from whoever who is interested in speaking. So these are 2 questions. I don't identify, the speaker, but whoever is interested, want to raise hands. Maybe Henry.
Yeah. With regards to SME, as I mentioned that developing a principle for MSME is quite challenging, in the sense that if we impose too much technical screening criteria in terms of classifying MSME as a green or sustainable investment project, it would be quite difficult and would be quite costly. It would deter them to enter into this new field. So our approach is to develop more of a principle base in terms of questionnaires in which they could assess themselves, in a sense that it is not quite as restrictive as the technical screening, but it would allow common language between the financier, in which this is the banking or financial institution, and the MSME themselves. Because developing this common language, I think, is needed. In particular in Indonesia, if you look at the micro level corporation, they don't even have an accounting standards. How do we superimpose on top of that requirement for technical screening? So it's a chance developing a principle-based approach, which one could also consider quite credible, but in the sense of the context of MSME. I think our approach is like that.
There is another approach which is used by some of the Chinese regional green finance pilot program, is the ESG rating methodology. They know that the small companies don't create qualified green projects against taxonomy, but I can rate your ESG performance. For example, in Huzhou, again, this is an example I mentioned early this year. They rated many companies, tens of thousands of companies, most of them SMEs, against a ESG, scoring matrix. So they create a threshold. Above that threshold, if ESG score is higher, then they regard it as a green company. Working capital loans go to the company, is regarded by the local government as green finance. Not yet recognized by central bank yet. So they got two sort of statistics. One is local version of green finance, which included official taxonomy-based green finance, and also the local, recognized SME green financing. So that might be another way of dealing with SME. Any other comments?
I'm happy to comment if I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. So just on both of those points, I think I'm probably less qualified to talk about MSMEs, but that's part of my point. Because I think that in my experience, from looking at different taxonomies and policy priorities around the world, there's much more focus on this in Asia and ASEAN, and I guess emerging markets generally, than in some of the more, some of the bigger markets around the world, where sustainable finance is a bit more entrenched. And why that's potentially a problem is that I think if you look at some of the taxonomies, this is my personal view, not ICMA's, but if you look at some of the taxonomies like the EU taxonomy, for example, or even the way the green bond principles are drafted, to be very honest, in terms of use of proceeds, these present some challenges to small and medium enterprises in terms of either finding the right projects or fulfilling the obligations in terms of impact reporting and internal standards. So what we want to do in ASEAN is provide standards and means for smaller companies still to start their journey in sustainable finance without having to jump too far. I've heard it said, if you want to cross a river, you can't jump across the river. You have to have steps along the way. You have to have some rocks in the middle of the river that you can step on. And that, I think, is part of the thinking behind the ASEAN taxonomy, and one reason why I think it's quite useful. So, I mentioned in terms of the ASEAN taxonomy, there's a plus standard, which I think in ICMA's view would be probably necessary to achieve in order to get full international investor credibility in the green space. However, the foundation framework, which is kind of a lower standard, frankly, can be very useful as a stepping stone and as an interim step that small and medium enterprises can take. And so one thing I probably should have mentioned at the start, but a couple of panelists have already mentioned it, is that when you talk about interoperability, one of the standards that we use at ICMA is looking at whether if you have a new taxonomy, is it additional, right? Is it actually is it doing the same thing as another taxonomy but in a different way, causing fragmentation, or is it actually adding something new? So if you have international taxonomies and then you have more national taxonomies that are actually giving more clarity and more steps along the way for MSMEs, that is actually additive, right? That's not conflicting. And so it's still fully interoperable. Now, secondly, on transition finance, this one I think we could talk for hours about, but again, I think this is an area where Asia is leading, and I would especially compliment the MAS and ASEAN for actually incorporating transition into the taxonomies directly, which is, I think, an innovation. So when you saw the first round of taxonomies, 4 or 5 years ago, just ages ago, it was very black and white, or green and brown, I suppose you would say. You're either in the taxonomy or you're not. But having this new category of transition, I think is very useful. First of all, because it gives a bit more nuance and gets away from some of the more political questions and philosophical questions. But secondly, what I really like about the Singapore approach, especially, is it has trajectories. Right? It actually has pathways along the way. So, and those are timed. So instead of just putting a category or an investment, an investment in a particular bucket, this bucket or that bucket, you actually have to evaluate your activities and their performance and the impact over time. And that is really in the spirit of transition. And ultimately, that's in the spirit of what we're trying to do with the Paris Agreement.
Now, on transition finance, there's one interesting and difficult question that's coming out of China debate is we ask the transition companies to develop a transition plan, which is called credible and science-based and involve short-term, medium-term, long-term targets up to 2050, 2060. But most SMEs say, I'm not going to live that long. 5 years later, I will no longer exist. So why should I be developing a 30-year transition plan? It's a waste of time. But I still want to get transition finance. How do we deal with that difficult question?
Can I respond?
Yeah, Adam?
Yeah, I think, Dr. Ma, if we link, so I think human behavior are very much driven by incentive and disincentive, right? So in that way, there are two approaches, and of course, within the two approaches, there are multiple ways. I think one way that we have seen, say in the case of Malaysia, the focus for SMEs will be on the key sectors. So there are 6 high carbon sectors that have been identified, in which SMEs in those sectors will need to also comply with the taxonomy requirement. So SMEs that are outside those 6, then you're so-called exempted. I think that could be one approach. The other approach, which is also linked between incentive and neutral, is whereby you focus on corporate supply chain. We do know that a lot of companies, like plantation companies, especially the established ones and the one that export to Europe and so on, they play along the whole value chain, and they source, say, palm oil and timber or materials across various parts of the world, and often those involve smallholders and so on. It is in the interest of the MNCs and the large companies to actually so-called green their supply chain, and because they do typically have the financial muscle, they could also kind of build the capacity and capability of the smallholder and SME along the supply chain. It is in their interest and to help them, because it is also helping them as a whole from a sourcing and export perspective. And then I think from a financial standpoint, I know that there's no link yet between taxonomy and risk weight capital and so on. I think this could be one of the development that BIS and so on will look into. But I think one of the incentive could be, as we have seen, sustainability linked loans that are linked to KPIs and so on. So the so-called discount in the interest rate, if a particular company has achieved based on certain agreed KPIs or targets based on the taxonomy, could then be used to kind of for the large company to kind of educate or nurture the supply chain, right? So in a way, it's a win-win. So there's additional so-called financial incentive for the company and for the large companies. The financial institution also tick the box in terms of greening their portfolio. and the SMEs and small holders will also benefit from the financial incentive and also being part of a credible supply chain. Yeah.
Thank you, Adam. I'd like to come back to Su Hui on your Amber transition taxonomy. Can you elaborate a little bit more on, what are the kind of activities you include in that, and how you actually deal with the coal-related issue? We had a discussion here on coal mining and coal-fired power generation. Do you have Amber activities in that sectors?
Yeah, so under the Singapore Asia taxonomy, there are two kind of approaches towards how we see transition activities. So the first one would be transition activities, where it refers to activities that currently do not meet the green thresholds, but are on a pathway to net zero or contributing to that net zero outcome. And one thing that we want to kind of emphasize here is, for it to be credible, there needs to be a sunset date, meaning transition is not meant to last indefinitely for the next 30 over years. And so sunset date is important. And for those sectors which currently there are no credible kind of pathways, decarbonization pathways. So in the hard to abate sectors like you imagine cement and manufacturing industrial sectors, we have come up with a separate category. It's also Amber, but Amber measures. So we focus on CAPEX, capital expenditures that would need to encourage capital investments into decarbonization measures or processes that help to reduce emissions and meet the green criteria over time. So these are the two kind of Amber activities as well as Amber measures that we have under our taxonomy. And also for certain hard to abate sectors, like example, the maritime, where currently that sector is also, there isn't a clear 1.5 degree aligned pathway. What we have done, and it's for vessels that are aligned with the industry targets under the IMO 2023 strategy. Those, if you are able to meet those targets, even though it's not 1.5 yet, but you are also allowed to be considered under Amber. So those are the key features of the transition category. And to your question, Dr. Martin, about coal, I think coal under electricity generation from coal, whether it's abated or not, I think those, we are very clear that those would fall under ineligible, meaning there won't be a transition for that. But what our focus on coal is actually the phase out of coal-fired power plants. So we're coming out with a new approach, a framework into how we should kind of channel financing into this phase out of coal. Given that, in the energy transition in the Asia Pacific region, coal is actually a very, very important source of for power generation. So what we have set out under the taxonomy is to have both an entity level as well as a facility level criteria that are aligned to a 1.5 degree outcome. So, for example, at the plant level, the plant has can only operate to about 2040. And not older than 25 years of operational life. And other criteria includes, the electricity generated from the phase out of the coal-fired power plants. There has to be a replacement into how the clean energy would need to come in within the same electricity grid. So some of these features are what we are looking to kind of ensure that we have, such that it will be a credible framework. Thank you.
Rosani, you want to add anything else?
Not specifically on transition, but I think it's related to transition and SMEs and also taxonomies in general, is that as taxonomies develop over time, we want to introduce some thresholds, right? Everyone's talking about thresholds, whether it's for the large companies or as a different threshold for SMEs, or thresholds that we use as KPIs for our transition. And one thing that I've noticed that a lot of these thresholds, we want to report some kind of number, some kind of data. And that data is actually quite important to be measured. And not all countries measure the data the same way or even collect the same data. I worked on a data project in Malaysia last year, and we found that a lot of data that we need don't actually, not that it doesn't exist, nobody is collecting that data. or if it is collected, it's not collected in a consistent manner or collected by a reliable data collector, or it's not even made public. It might be held by a government agency and does not disclose publicly. The thing is, when we're talking about transition, we're setting thresholds. There's a target there. And if we set a target using measurement, ideally it would be comparable across different countries. Because if we use one number in Indonesia, another number in Singapore, a third number in Thailand, we can all in theory comply and meet our taxonomies, but we all comply at different thresholds at different levels. But on the surface, it may look like we comply with. I just want to bring up the fact that I think it's also important to remember that data is very important to what we want to do and achieve.
Now this brings me to this fintech solution of translating different between different taxonomies. Because I already heard from, for example, Deutsche Bank in China asking me, do I need to follow the PBOC Chinese taxonomy? I said yes, because you are operating here, right? You need to report to the Chinese Central Bank on what kind of green stuff you're doing. You need to also report to ECB, because that's your headquarters, central bank. You probably need to report on European taxonomy. And then if you operate in Huzhou, which is a city, they have their own taxonomy. You probably need to report in that taxonomy. So if it's done separately, manually, it's going to be hugely costly, right? But some fintech company will come in and say, I will do a system for you. I will translate your balance sheet, and you give me all the underlying documentation. I will produce the 3 reports for you automatically. And maybe in the future, we get 200 taxonomy. This machine can convert between one to any of the other 199 taxonomies. That's how, I guess, cost can be reduced by generating data that's usable in different markets. But anyway, I think we have now only a few minutes left. Mustache, you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, Dr. Mao, that I believe there are already companies doing this, or at least trying to. I happened to be at the Singapore FinTech Festival a couple of weeks ago, and there are a number of fintechs who have identified this exact problem. And so I met one company, for example, that basically takes raw environmental data such as emissions from even the Internet of Things, puts that in a structured data format, and then has the technology to be able to translate that into different reporting templates. So in theory, you would be able to take that raw data and then put it into different ways that would be useful for compliance with different taxonomies. So I hope that the industry would come up with a solution on this, but I think you've come up with a very good business idea that many are already pursuing.
Questions? Yeah, please. Do you have a mic for them?
Hi, thank you. I'm Tiza, Director of Climate Policy Initiative in Indonesia. I had a question, and I was wondering if I could ask the moderator a question, but also by Henry, I think. Could you speak more about any efforts ongoing at the moment to do a common ground taxonomy between China and ASEAN taxonomy, and how far that's come along, if at all? And so far, and if it has progressed so far, is it looking positive for the equivalence mapping between the 2 taxonomies so far? Thank you.
Now, let me say a few words on the progress of the Common Ground Taxonomy. It started about 3 years ago, co-chaired by China and EU, namely myself representing China and Marcel Hug representing EU DG FISMA. We had more than a dozen members, country members, involved in this working group on Common Ground Taxonomy, but the work is actually done by Chinese experts and European experts, and some of which was commissioned to outside experts, including CBI and so on. So last 3 years, we created 2 versions of Common Ground Taxonomy based on Chinese and European, which is what I call the overlapping portion of the 2 taxonomy. So this is how I did it, like this. So the Chinese one like that, European one like that, the overlapping portion is a common ground taxonomy. So we end up with 72 activities, which both recognize as green and sustainable. And that's being used, as I said. Early this year, MAS, the Singaporean Central Bank, came to us saying, we want to join as the new sort of country addition to the Common Ground Taxonomy next version. And basically, they wrote a letter to me and to Marcel Hag saying they had an interest. So we welcomed Singapore to join early this year, and they're now part of this new team creating the new version of a Common Ground Taxonomy. So hopefully, after some times of working with the Singaporean experts, the next version of CGT will be called a European Chinese Singaporean Taxonomy. And exactly how it's going to be done, I think we're still relying on experts. I was saying initially in the working group that if Singapore can bring additional activities to the existing CGT, meaning there are few activities that China doesn't have, Europe doesn't have, but you have in Singapore, maybe some sort of a NBS, nature-based solutions, which ASEAN countries a lot, then I would more than welcome to have these additional items in the new version of CGT, because China will not block it. Europe will not object to it because we don't have it, right? So it will be you, Singapore, setting the standard and bringing it into the new taxonomy. But if Singapore wants to review the existing 72 items, that's a little bit more complicated. My view is that we don't want to reopen all the cases because it takes us 3 years for agreeing on the 72 activities. If we want to reopen each of the 72, it will take another 3 years. So that's where I think the discussion is still going on. Hopefully, we won't take too long. We have some addition from the Singaporean contribution. Then it's about ASEAN question. I know Eugene Wong has told me that he is leading the development of ASEAN taxonomy and wanting to join. My question to him is that is the ASEAN taxonomy a official taxonomy that can be implemented with regulators? Now, if not, that might be complicated because so far the CGT is consisting of countries with authorities pushing out their taxonomy. We are building a new taxonomy based on the regulatory taxonomy, but not an NGO taxonomy. So somehow, I think if ASEAN taxonomy gain its sort of official endorsement and become the common ground taxonomy of the ASEAN, I think that might be the time for us to integrate ASEAN taxonomy into the CGT. Any other questions? Well, if not, I think it's the right time to wrap up. Just very quickly, I think a few key takeaways. Taxonomy will definitely be the major building block for green financial system because it provides some of the necessary functions like labeling products, measuring performance, allocating incentives, and assisting with disclosure. But also the process is very difficult because every country will have to spend a lot of time and energy working on these complex sectoral issues. But there are ways to reduce the cost of sharing knowledge and building some sort of a common language within the region. Yet, I think a few issues are not fully resolved. How to deal with SMEs, how to deal with some of the tricky transition activities, especially the co-related sectors. So all of these require, I guess, more efforts, more dialogue between private and public sector and experts. So we'll be interested in having your feedback, not just right now, but after this conversation on how we can further contributing our ideas to the ASEAN taxonomy and its adoption on the ground. Once again, thanks to all the panelists for a great speech, and thank you all for participation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Majun, for moderating today's discussion. We will have coffee break until 2:45, and we'll commence sharply at 2:45 for session 2 on carbon markets. Thank you.
Okay, a very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and all the audience online as well. Welcome to the second session. Today we're going to talk about the carbon market in Southeast Asia. So as the MC has highlighted, interesting choice of word, trump card of Southeast Asia. We'll talk more about that, but I think in terms of potential, it's been touted to be one of the largest. Southeast Asia holds almost 25% of the world's potential for natural climate solutions, and an estimated of 58% of threatened forests in the region being seen as financially viable carbon credit projects in the future. Now, in terms of carbon exchange, carbon trading, I think Singapore has launched that some time back, Indonesia a few months ago, Malaysia just very recently. I believe that Thailand is also preparing the same thing. So again, Southeast Asian markets are embracing carbon market with that accelerated pace. While all of this sounds very exciting, we know that the policy, mechanism, credibility of carbon trading are still often questioned. That is why on a regional scale, more discussions on due diligence, standardized accounting measures, integrity are really encouraged. And that's exactly what we would want to delve today. Let me introduce our esteemed speakers. We got 4 on site here and 1 online. So first would be, let me go actually to CV. Megan Wijaya, who's next to me here, CEO of Indonesia Climate Exchange and CEO of Clearing and Settlement House, or CCP, the Indonesia Clearing House. CIX is a platform that offers climate market-based instrument, and we'll talk more about it. So Tom Abbott. Tom is the head of Southeast Asia and Pacific Business Development, primary markets of London Stock Exchange. So in this role, Tom is responsible for supporting companies and their owners from the region to understand the process of going public and life as a listed company on London Stock Exchange. So he spent time in China and Singapore as well, analyst for CITIC at the time, and one of the subject matter experts on the carbon trading from LSE. Jeffrey Chatelia, CEO and founder of Forest Carbon. Jeff is a conservation scientist and the CEO of Forest Carbon. Throughout this stint with Forest Carbon, Jeff has advised major Indonesian corporations, international firms, multilateral institutions, and environmental organizations on conservation finance, forestry, and sustainability for over 10 years in Asia. And Forest Carbon is a forest restoration and conservation company with offices in Jakarta and Singapore. So essentially, the actual project developer. So it's actually a big value chain there. Next is Gabriel Wong, the co-founder of Metaverse Green Exchange, or MVGX, a digital exchange licensed and regulated by the MAS in Singapore and powered by Nasdaq's advanced trading and surveillance technologies. It provides qualified asset owners and institutional investors with a full service infrastructure, including primary issuance, secondary trading, settlement, and custody of asset-backed tokens. So the company aims to be a global hub for green financing and will also be the first exchange to incorporate carbon disclosure for both issuers and investors. Last but not least is Mr. Ge Xingyan, who's the Vice President of Susal Wave. It's a Shenzhen-based fintech company focusing on the quantitative evaluation of sustainable development value. Xingyan was also a committee member of the UNDP Private Sector Advisory Board and a member of the specialist team on Sustainable Finance Standardization Group, and a long experience in climate change issue and carbon trading, including involvement in the Shenzhen Emission Trading Scheme, or the ETS framework. So quite a lot of experience on perhaps on the compliance side of the carbon trading. So let me start actually with talking about 3 big points that we wanted to talk today. One is the universe, the potential. What is this? Why people are talking about it? What is really the size of this potential for Southeast Asia? The second one, we'll talk about the enabling environment. And the third one is about the trading itself. So first one, I'll ask Jeff. Jeff, what do you think about, there's a lot of buzz going around about carbon market, carbon trading, carbon credits, particularly on the NBS side in Southeast Asia, Indonesia, definitely. And what do you think is happening? What does the landscape look like in the global sort of sphere of both the compliance and voluntary carbon market?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's important to look back, how carbon markets really emerged in Southeast Asia. And in 2007, when Indonesia hosted the climate negotiations in Bali, that was when the world community came together and said that forest restoration and conservation is a really important climate mitigation tool and activity. And so that really led to a new market around generating carbon credits from forest restoration and conservation, which we call in the sector nature-based solution projects. And so over the few years since that event, Indonesia created the frameworks to develop projects in this sector. And so for the past decade, Indonesia has been building this sector, and there's now close to 500,000 hectares that are being protected and restored in Indonesia. And Indonesia has also produced over 75 million carbon credits within the voluntary carbon market space. Another leader in Southeast Asia is Cambodia. The Cambodia context, the government has adopted the voluntary carbon market as a way to implement its NDC in climate mitigation strategy. And that country has produced roughly 45 million carbon credits to date. And so Southeast Asia has the potential to really expand further. When we look at Indonesia's forestry estate, it's close to over 150 million hectares. So the potential to build out this sector is quite enormous. My company, Forest Carbon, we focus on restoration of peatland areas, and we launched a project in 2016 with a $6 million impact investment loan from the United Kingdom. And at that time, carbon markets were only a few $100 million globally, and carbon credits were trading at around $2 a credit. Now the market in 2022 has exceeded over $2 billion. Carbon credit prices have been trending anywhere from $10 to $20 per credit. So we've seen a huge increase. The climate negotiations that were hosted a few years ago in Glasgow really set the stage where companies were coming together around net zero commitments, and they were looking to these types of projects to source credits to offset a portion of their emissions. And so this has really created the market and the opportunity for Southeast Asia. Now, when you compare it to Latin America, in terms of hectares being protected, Latin America is much further ahead with close to 10 million hectares under management of projects that are producing credits. So that's 10 times what Southeast Asia is experiencing. But the last couple of years, Indonesia has been looking to implement more regulations to enhance the market. And so this has culminated in this past September with the launch of the carbon exchange. Now, interestingly, no nature-based solution projects were listed on that exchange. And so Indonesia to date has already transacted over 75 million carbon credits from the nature-based solution sector, where in the first day of trading in IDX was only around 450,000 tons of CO2. And so the opportunity, I think, is ensuring that the country is able to roll out the regulations needed so nature-based solution projects can be listed on the exchange, and we can start to see more robust trading taking place.
Thanks. We'll go back on your point about it has to be encouraged, it will develop further on that enabling environment. But Tom, how do you see that potential? Would you agree with that? Southeast Asia is one of the hottest sort of prospect, if you will, within the world. I mean, from a London side, actually, how do you see this?
Yeah, no, I very much agree with that. I think going back to COP26 and sort of the way that we saw it, we were pulling together a lot of the industry within the UK, whether it was large MNCs listed on our markets with operations globally, all coming with net zero targets. Embarrassingly, probably for a lot of these companies, not necessarily knowing how they're going to get there. They might have some targets for 2025, 2030, know which bits of their operations they need to be changing, but then really scratching around for how best to look at carbon credits, how to manage those, whether they should be looking solely at nature-based solutions, when will CCS and so on be a realistic proposition. So I think the way that a lot of companies saw it, and when big groups get together at COP and so on, relevant in a few hours, I think, we see it as a real opportunity for there to be some sharing between and how best to both finance the projects so that the millions of hectares that are being managed grows here, but also trying to be cognizant that the reason that these large MNCs are doing this is it's got to be done in a just way. They've got to be looking at transition. They've got to be thinking about other sustainable development goals as they do it, and really trying to do it in a way that recognizes there's obviously going to be national considerations and so on around a lot of these factors. So I think that's sort of how we viewed it. I don't know if you want me to talk about the not solution that we've got, but the way we've been approaching it as LSE. Or?
Yeah, no, of course.
So sort of with that background, we realised that there were a lot of brokers in the market, potentially sort of taking their fair share from the voluntary carbon markets and so on in particular. But we realised the one thing that we have as an exchange, we're not a commodities exchange, we never have been. We sometimes get LSE and LME confused. But we have provided finance into sustainable infrastructure for a number of years. Sustainable infrastructure funds have been the fastest growing part of our market. In terms of market capitalization in the past 5 years, I think it's grown 300%. And what you're seeing there is you're seeing pension funds, long-term institutional investors willing to invest into long-term projects for those returns, for knowing that there's those long-term purchase agreements for power. Could you see that being equivalent to carbon credit projects, where you can view that we know a rough curve of where these carbon credits will be going, but we know that we need to get more capital going into these so there can be more Jeffs in the world, and that we can trust people as much as you can trust Jeff's operations. And the bit that we can bring as LSE is we're really a market infrastructure. We bring trust to markets through disclosure and through creating rules and regulation. So we've created a framework, not another taxonomy or anything like that, just some enhanced disclosure to make it easier for investors to understand exactly what is coming out of different projects, so they can then be listed as a fund. It could be a single type of project. It could be specific to one country. It could be diversified across if investors accept that. We think initially it won't be like that. But,
that's interesting, actually. From that perspective, actually, which region in the world do you see actually that has already? So how do you put ASEAN in that context? Because it's coming from the investors sort of side of things.
It's a good question. So the way that a lot of the corporates would speak to us would be, if we have operations somewhere, we want to make sure that we're actually being active in that country with what we're doing in terms of our climate work. So it really has been a sort of an issuer-to-issuer basis. The stage we're at the moment, being the UK, our first fund has been a woodland carbon code, sort of UK-focused fund, but huge interest. And we see it actually as something that complements any local trading program. The credits themselves, if we want them to be sold within a certain jurisdiction, within Indonesia, you could actually use the fund as a feeder into the Indonesian carbon exchange.
Right.
So it really depends on sort of the demand from the investors. There are some on the institutional pension side that you see it as a diversified asset eventually and are willing to be long-term, but I think much more you see the corporates themselves that want to be active in the regions they are.
Because it's one of the, probably, the more suitable offset instrument actually that available in the market, I believe. Now, let's go to the exchange themselves. And I won't ask a question about the prospect and potential, because I'm sure the reason why they founded the exchange is because of that belief. But Megan, start actually closer to home here while we are in Jakarta. What do you see as how do you see the regulatory framework and the other enabling environment from a policy perspective, from the way that the standardizations, so how do you see actually this connectivity with, there's a lot of debate actually about, the global certification bodies, gold standards, VERAs and others, and how do you see the situation right now, and how do you want that for your exchange, ICX, in Indonesia to flourish? What would be ideal?
First of all, thank you for having me here. It's an absolute pleasure to be with the esteemed panelists. And I think that regulations is ultimately the foundations of a properly driven market. Without the right regulations, the market will not flourish, we will not be thriving, and people will have sort of a different interpretations on how to make the market move forwards. And I think that one of the biggest elephant in the room right now is probably on how the Indonesian is coming up with their own standards and vice versa with the already established standards. For example, like Vera, gold standards. Yeah. And I think that this is creating a lot of discomfort really coming in from the prospective buyers in the market. And I think that we need to address this issue seriously. And I think that there needs to be a mutual recognition of system of framework so that this thing can go scale up and could be accepted by buyers. I think that's number one. And I think that number two, in the context of framework, of regulatory framework, we need to understand as well the implication of carbon tax, which is still missing right now. Yep. Just to give you a context, right? Singapore carbon tax is scheduled to be $45 by 2024, and by 2030, it's around $80. So this is clearly sending a signals to the markets to decarbonize. So if we don't have that sort of a right framework of how we are going to move forwards with the markets, we will not be able to see a thriving carbon market in Indonesia. So I think that those are really the big challenges that we're facing right now, but we believe in solutions. We believe that there is a solutions to every problems, and I think that the government just needs to sit down and probably let the dust settle after February 14, so that people can come back to their work and really focus on what matters so that we can deliver results.
Just on that one, actually very quickly, well, I think Indonesia has announced that carbon tax will be introduced in 2025, right, in a meaningful way. But how do you want to bridge actually that so-called price discovery in your exchange in the meantime, right? I mean, it will take time, even after 2025. The pricing of the carbon tax, a bit like what your story about Singapore, right? It will be gradually going up. It won't go straight away actually to the level that is in parity, perhaps actually with some of the OECD markets.
Well, I think that if we see the neighboring markets and the global markets on how they're trying to price the carbon credits right now, there seems to be an overemphasis on standardizations, which is very common in the commodity markets, standardizations. However, we believe that the different kind of approach needs to be catered for the carbon market, especially at a very early stage, nascent kind of markets where we don't have the right amount of data to come up with what is then really the true carbon price. And not until we have big data and more projects listed on the market, then we can actually come up with a configurations or even approximations on what is the cost of carbon really. And I think that coming back to the carbon tax, which is going to be in 2025, I'm just hoping that it's not too late. Because I think that one of the biggest elephant in the room again is actually CBAM, as we know, the cross-border adjustment mechanisms, which if the importing countries felt that our climate policy is weak, which is reflected by the carbon tax and the carbon prices, they might impose additional tariff, which will make our products and services deemed to be non-competitive in the long future.
Right. So you're calling actually for an accelerated timeline, in fact, actually for that. Gabriel, can I move to you again, actually, as also the founder, Metaverse Green Exchange in Singapore, that also trades carbon credit, among others. So again, how do you see what exactly across ASEAN or in Singapore, the ideal enabling environment? Where do we stand now? Whether it's regulatory, taxation, financing, the reporting, disclosures, and so on, standardizations. And where do you want to see what would be the ideal situation to help this to scale up?
Right. I think to echo what has been said, I think ASEAN, it's obviously a huge, in terms of the carbon resource, right? It has been said that the Amazon is the left lung of the earth, and then of course, whether it's Indonesia or ASEAN as a whole, it's the right lung of the earth, and that really gives you a sense of what the potential is. I think unfortunately right now what we are seeing is somewhat a fragmented market, and the fragmentation is driven, I think, by a number of factors. I think clearly there is a lot of uncertainty in terms of carbon standards, and then of course we see regulations. I mean, there are now efforts in countries like Indonesia, in Malaysia. Jeff mentioned about Cambodia, taking what I feel is baby steps towards creating a carbon trading mechanism. But unfortunately, I think in most instances, regulations and policy are not clear, and in certain cases, they are also taking perhaps the wrong direction, in the sense that rather than launching a carbon trading exchange or marketplace, probably the best thing to do is to set up a national registry, right? So I think on this point, we see in Indonesia, Elka, SRN, making efforts towards that. But in countries like Malaysia, because of political reasons, they have been unable to come out with a consensus about setting up a national registry. And the registry, it's actually important, right, in terms of facilitating transparency towards the trading of carbon credits, because it provides therefore a government backing, of sorts towards both the establishment of the projects that creates the credits. It should also, in a way, provide some kind of endorsement of the standards and the quality of the credit, and then ultimately tracking the issuance and the trading of the credits. And this is quite important as we think about facilitating cross-border trading of carbon credit, right? So today is the start of COP in Dubai. And I think one of the key themes and the topics that needs to be resolved, it's, actualizing Article 6 trading, which is really the global basis for, cross-border trading of carbon credit. And very much linked to that, it's the different registry, whether it's at a government level, country level, or we see efforts by the World Bank, creating organizations like the Climate Action Trust based out of Singapore. The idea, as I said, is really to make sure that there is, first of all, government so-called endorsement, transparency, and the tracking of credits. So with this in place, the so-called carbon trading infrastructure in place, it gives confidence to the end buyers, to the corporates, right? Whether it's in America and in Europe or in Japan, they know that when they buy these credits, there is a certain standard, there's a certain kind of a government approval and endorsement, and also it doesn't violate the NDC issue, right? So this is important, right? And I think that is something that has been now on the so-called to-do agenda of the governments. I mean, we have, spoken to the relevant agencies in Malaysia, here in Indonesia. We have spoken to, the government in Vietnam and Cambodia, and I think that they start to understand that. But because of political reasons or because of policy reasons, I think they have been slow towards that. That is the situation we are at today. But the good news is that I think there is that recognition, the understanding that this needs to be done, and hopefully there is now the action, the political will whether, with the support of international organizations like COP, or even private sectors like Standard Chartered, to sort of enable the governments to build up the right carbon trading infrastructure, right? The registry now supplementing the action of the trading exchange, or even private marketplace like ICX or even MVGX as in Singapore. Because I think, as has been spoken, without the regulatory clarity, there is going to be a lot of hesitancy, towards buying of credit, and ultimately, the voluntary market is going to be driven by buyers, and if people are not sure, that's going to impact both the trading volume and also the price. So, to Jeff's point earlier, he started, in developing projects, he was selling them for $2. But, the expectation is that we would be able to sell them for $10. And Megan's point about, how the implementation of the carbon tax should actually provide a so-called floor price towards the credits, because the government, at least the Singapore government, has actually provided for us a what we call a forward yield curve, right? Because it tells you by 2030 it's going to be 80 Sing dollars per ton. And so if you are a market participant, you just kind of plot the price and you go, hey, this is the yield curve, and thank you very much, Singapore government, right? I mean, all of us in finance, we understand that. But to get there, you have to make sure that there is the confidence from the buyer community. And unfortunately, I think we have seen in the last couple of months that prices have actually kind of gone down, and that's really not good for anybody, whether it's for the government, for developers like Jeff, for exchange operators like us, because if the prices are dropping,
True.
That's really going to impede the overall market.
Completely agree with you, right? Clarity is needed on Article 6 with regards to the corresponding adjustment NDCs, so that it takes out the confusion that is currently happening. Well, actually, at the same time, there's also this agnostic non-corresponding adjustment credits that are highly in demand on the voluntary side by the global corporates, as I now said. And the second part is about the clarity and the conduciveness of the local, within each of the market, regulatory requirement that supports the carbon credit projects, as well as the trading. But on registry certifications, there's another paradigm, because you seem to be advocating actually a local sort of registry and so on. But there's another paradigm that in order to have that conformity on what constitute high quality carbon, ideally, in an ideal world, there should be a global body that oversees this, whether that's sanctioned by UNFCCC or the likes of ICVCM, for example. I mean, what do you think about this? So, because having it more federated within each of the country may give rise to discrepancies, non-interoperability, and so on. How do you see the other paradigm?
So I think it's a very interesting dynamic happening now in the global voluntary carbon market, right? Why do I say that? Because you have organizations like ICVCM, right, that is sort of not regulating, but sort of proposing the best practices, right, for developers of projects. And then you have the VCMIs who are sort of proposing best practices in terms of how you buy and utilize carbon credit, right? So that's at the so-called global level, but at the same time, they are not a regulatory body, right? They are influential because they comprise very, important figures from finance, from the carbon
Should we have a global regulatory body? I think that's probably
I think it's hard. To be honest, I think it's difficult because the issue, the outcome of the Paris Agreement, essentially, and of course, as Tom said, post COP26, what that means is that carbon has acquired a nationality, right? It has become a sovereignty issue, whereby countries like Indonesia has now decided to sort of take back the control of the export of carbon credit. And so I think organizations like ICVCM, they are influential. They can sort of nudge and advise national governments. But I think ultimately what's going to happen is that the local regulators are going to take control and decide for themselves how they want to do it and what is the standards. And I can give you an example. In Singapore, we are going to shortly, I don't know when, but the government has said that by the end of the year, which is 6 weeks from now, our Ministry of Environment is going to publish a white list of so-called eligible credits, which you can then buy to offset against the carbon tax, which will come into play
Right.
1st Jan, right? So this is a government action, right? And I think there is a lot of behind the scenes lobbying, whether it's from Vera, from Gold Standard, maybe even, bodies like ICVCM that is trying to influence what goes onto the white list, right? And of course, as a private corporations who are looking to buy, offset, for them it's very simple. If the Singapore government say that this is the white list, I'll just, buy whatever is on the white list.
Yeah.
And so they won't care about what ICVCM says. They don't really want to understand what Article 6 means because, it's really beyond, their core business.
So something that is more
it's like
practical actually for the local.
It's like the
buyers.
cliff notes of buying carbon credits, right?
Yeah.
Just tell me what to buy, and this has the government,
Very well.
endorsement. I'll just buy it.
Thank you, Gabriel. Very interesting. Can we move before I go back actually on the enabling environment? Xing Yan, how is the situation in China? China has got its own exchange market over there, and actually a little bit more advanced, perhaps actually than Southeast Asia in that regard. So how do you see all of that and the enabling environment that has been evolving the last few years in China to accelerate or scale up this carbon market?
Okay, thanks. Our esteemed panelists have talked a lot about the voluntary carbon market, the credit trading. I will talk about more on mandatory carbon market, the emissions trading scheme, the ETS. My name is Xing Ange, former CEO of China Emissions Exchange Shenzhen. I have been working on carbon market for more than 16 years through CDM, the Clean Development Mechanism, to China's local pilot carbon market, now the national carbon market. I once authored the first book about introducing the global ETS practices in 2011. Also drafted the first carbon market regulation in China in 2012. Launched the first pilot market in China in 2013. And also elevated carbon finance. Many of them are the first exploration in China. Over all my experience in China's carbon market, I have the faith in emissions reduction effect of ETS. However, I also learned deeply that that emissions reduction effect depends on many factors that together contributing to the emissions reduction. I would say that a well-operating ETS requires at least 3 essential elements. That is balanced design, sufficient market incentive, and quick response and adjustment. So let's go deeper about the balanced design. It involves many dimensions about ETS design. Some of the key balance including at least the following issues, like the balance between intensity cap and absolute cap. Intensity cap is more suitable for developing economy whose emissions is on the rise and will not peak very soon, because it gives the flexibility to develop the economy and curb the emissions at the same time. However, it is also evident that its effect on the emissions reduction is slower and not as obvious as the absolute cap. In particular, at the current time that tackling climate change is so pressing at the global level. In addition, the balance between free allocation and the auction. Free allocation makes ETS easier to accept and adopted by the government and the constituents, but it also has the least pressure on emissions reduction on the covered entities. Also important to note, carbon price actually actually paid has been a leverage that impacts on the exportation of products with high-level embedded emissions, which is also mentioned by our panelists, such as the EU Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, CBAM, and other developed countries may follow EU's measures. Furthermore, the balance between the sector-dominated coverage and also the economy-wide coverage of the companies and different types of GHGs. Sector-dominated coverage has its advantage of less impact on economy, therefore easier to kick it off. But at the same time, the market performance of the sector-dominated ETS is not as liquid as economy-wide ETS, which is also witnessed in EU carbon market and also the California carbon market compared with the carbon market of RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. The market force is playing more important role in achieving the emissions reduction at the least social cost. So without engagement of the market participants, ETS would not accomplish its goal at its own force. So in terms of the sufficient market incentive, our esteemed panelists actually talked a lot about it. It's important to keep in mind for the policymakers that ETS should embrace the theory of incentive comparability, which is key to motivate the market force to engage in the carbon market. So what are the factors that could affect the market forces incentive in the ETS? I think first, the data quality of the emissions. No one would play in a market where poor data prevails, even data fraud occurs. Second, the long-term and stable policy goals of emissions reduction. That is, ETS has to set up a policy goal of emissions reduction goals for the long term and keep the long-term goals alive, and also clarify the interim milestone of the goals, which allow the market participants fully understand the directions of the ETS market, and also they have sufficient time to adjust their business or plan their reduction measures.
Thank you.
Third is
risk, actually, go on. Yeah. Sorry, I thought you finished.
Yeah. Okay. Also, there should be some risk management mechanism, because market players understand that there is a market risk in place. So therefore, they have to find out their market risk management mechanism in place to mitigate or transfer the risks. For example, the derivative market, which trades futures, options, and swap, together with the spot market to hedge the market risks. In addition, the insurance products that cover the risks of volatility of the annual emissions of the companies. But last but not least is a quick response and adjustment of the ETS, because learning by doing has been a common phenomenon in ETS practices. Almost all the ETS experience significant adjustment in mechanisms, such as the stability reserve mechanism of the EU ETS, also the half cutting of the annual cap of the regime, etc. It indicates that whether the competent authority of ETS could respond to the changing context and adjust accordingly, determine the success of the ETS operation.
Yeah.
If we're rethinking about the history of the EU ETS development, its original legislation on EU ETS, the Directive 2003 S7 EC, has been amended 15 times in past 15 years, let alone the detailed implementation acts or the administrative measures. So the success of the EU ETS largely depends on the quick response and adjustment of the EU
I think this is a very important point. I think because that's the other part actually of the enabling environment. I mean, the ETS sort of element on this. So thanks. I'll get back to you. But Jeff, can I just ask, actually, I mean, you of course can comment further about that sort of regulatory framework, this current situation and so on. But my question to you is this: as a project developer, how do you see the access to financing for project developers on carbon development across Southeast Asian market? Is it easy? Is it not easy? I mean, who's been financing very actively? Because we see, to be quite honest, perhaps the banking side is actually not quite yet there, right? But financing has happened. Projects actually have been going on. How do you see that?
I would characterize the investment that's coming into this space as mostly venture capital, or capital that comes with high risk and high interest rates. It's a bit too speculative for traditional banks. And I think one way to kind of shift out of that is the emergence of compliance markets, right? So we've been here talking about Singapore. They're ramping up their carbon tax up to 80. This gives price assurances to a project developer and vice versa, their debt financer. And so, when we hear Gabriel talking about the whitelist that Singapore is going to put out and allow companies to buy credits from projects that are pre-registered or approved.
Sanctioned by the government.
Sanctioned. That creates a lot of certainty into the market. And so I see that as critical to transforming our sector, making it more mature. And we've seen this work already in Colombia. So they set a carbon tax at $5, and they also allowed companies, instead of paying the tax, to buy credits from approved projects. And that worked really well. And I think as we start to see companies increase that carbon tax, more and more projects become viable. I've looked at forest restoration projects across Indonesia, and essentially every forest concession works almost at a $12 price point. So if Singapore, for example, starts allowing carbon credits from forest restoration projects in Indonesia to sell in their market, we could see complete restoration of the entire forestry estate here in Indonesia. So I think that type of compliance market is really going to take things to the next level, for everyone here.
Thanks, Jeff. I would open for questions from the floor, if there's any questions to any of the panelists. Before we got into more sort of intense debate and discussions like we did in the holding room before. So any question from the floor? Can we take question online? I don't believe so, but in any case, maybe actually Dr. Ma, of course, by all means.
Now, I'm not sure if you discussed this already, the corresponding adjustment issue. At least some of you are concerned that if certain cross-border transactions will have to be subject to corresponding adjustment, and the government may renege on its permission today for you to trade, and in the future will penalize you for doing, unregistered, unreported cross-border transaction. Now, is that a big fear in the market by foreign investor, and how we should tell the government to do things to clarify that?
Thank you, Dr. Ba. We did cover actually a little bit actually on that, but I think your question is very pointed in terms of whether that can be a hindrance, right? Actually on that. So I think actually Megan or Jeff, do you want to take that on? We know that we discussed actually that all the voluntary carbon credits that's been sold from Indonesia, all non-corresponding adjustment without non-CA, but again, this NDC confusions is always...
Yeah, I think, our experience as a company selling carbon credits to major Fortune 500 companies, they've been interested to buy credits for the impact that they create on the ground. They want to be investing in the supply sheds where they source commodities that they use to make their consumer goods products, for example. And so it's not just about CO2 emission reductions. They're buying something that's a little bit more broader. And so all of our clients that have bought millions and millions of dollars of carbon credits, they're willing to say, we want Indonesia to use these credits for its NDC. And so I think it's a unique opportunity right now where Indonesia could really leverage the voluntary market and help it achieve its NDC targets during this interim phase before we see carbon taxes come online in this country and Singapore's carbon tax get ratcheted up, and they start allowing companies to offset instead of paying the tax. So I think during this interim phase, the NDC issue hasn't been a problem for companies, but countries have been more concerned about it and how they report it. And that goes back to having a national registry system. That's one way where the voluntary market can be, flourishing, operating, generating, foreign direct investment, and then more importantly, creating that green economy in the rural areas. But the country can still keep track of everything that's happening on the ground.
Tom, Gabriel, do you want to add any comments?
I think that's right. I think it could be viewed as VCM as sort of a stepping stone to that, and using that as seeing it more as overseas direct investment coming in and so on. I think for the international investors, well, Jeff deals with them day to day, and we certainly have larger ones listed on our market with very developed sustainability teams who are all completely on top of where they're getting these, which SDGs they want to be hitting, and so on. But the one thing that we think would help scale up the market is where you can enable smaller companies as well, or medium-sized companies who don't potentially have a large sustainability team. It might fall under a finance and a marketing sort of perspective, where they might, just because of the risks associated, where if there is anything like that, it might put them off coming into the market as quickly. So I think it's always going to sort of be a bit of a trust issue and create concerns around the risk around certain projects, but it should definitely not be seen as a complete obstacle.
Thank you. Any other questions from anyone on the floor? I do have a question, since we have Dr. Mai and Dr. Mari here, particularly for exchange operators. So maybe Gabriel and Megan. So what's the volume that we see now? This is, I think we talked about, it's still at a nascent state, right? But how do you build your projections? What is your sort of envisioning, actually, that will happen in the next 3 years in your exchanges in Singapore and Indonesia?
Right. So I think what we see that is being traded on the exchange shows a very interesting market dynamic, right? So we have had a few millions carbon credits that has been so-called traded. But it's not traded in the traditional sense as we understand in the financial market, whereby you are trading stocks, right? There's circularity, you're buying and selling. Because a lot of the buyers right now are really buying it for offset purposes, right? So they basically buy and they take it off the market. They are not keeping it on their trading account and then I'm going to sell it. They would retire it. Yeah. So that is what we are seeing right now, and hence, if you want to be very accurate about that, it's really a OTC platform as opposed to a financial exchange as we commonly understand it. So I think that's one point. To your second part of the question, which is where do we see the volume coming from? I think that we are seeing a lot of private sector initiative. Examples would be people like Jeff, who are sort of seeing the trend, and they are putting in the resources to develop projects. At the same time, we are also seeing a lot of government initiative that is sort of promoting and trying to harmonize some of the process, which enables, whether it's a local government projects or a so-called public-private partnership type of projects. And we see that happening in countries like Malaysia, which is interesting because of the political structure, right? There's the federal government, there's the state government, and the state government has a lot of autonomy, right? So you would see a lot of the actions not really happening at the federal, but at the state level, and the state level could by themselves get involved, or they could, as I said, do some kind of a public-private partnership projects. But ultimately, I think one of the key enabler, if I may, which is to address what Dr. Ma's question earlier. I think Dr. Ma just really hits the problem on the head, being a policy expert himself, which is a lot of the governments that we speak to, they are aware now of the so-called correspondent adjustment problem, right? And I think the solution, as we talk to them, they crystallize on the understanding that there is a need for the individual countries to set up the registry, and that is really it's sort of like a unified clearinghouse for all the projects that happens within their jurisdiction, making sure that it's done in the right way, the right standard, registering, and then ultimately deciding if they choose to do so to sell the credits with the correspondent adjustments, right? And if they decide not to, then is there a way to sort of separate the NDC component from the commercial aspect of credits? And this is a very, I think, interesting question. And it's not really just a theoretical or policy question, because as we have seen, what Singapore government is trying to do, it's setting up that whitelist of credits, but they insist that all the credits coming into Singapore, they must come with the NDC, the corresponding adjustment, which I think will be quite interesting to see how that plays out, because I think a lot of the countries are saying to Singapore and saying, hey, look, I'm happy to sell you the voluntary credits, but I'm not so sure
without the corresponding
exactly. So I think a case in point is like Indonesia, which I think you're quite familiar with, right? I think Malaysia also is taking a sort of a wait and see approach. So, Singapore is sort of in a quandary, because we don't generate sufficient credits on our own. We need to buy from other countries, and if we insist that credits come with a corresponding adjustment, and the countries are saying, no, you know what, I'm not going to let you have it for now, right? So I wonder how that's going to play out. So that is a situation that is interesting to
I think that's
watch.
a very interesting point, because there are some countries, even in Southeast Asia, that probably actually would like to keep the corresponding adjustments. They don't want actually to affect their NDCs, like Indonesia, Malaysia, to your point. But there are countries like Singapore require actually that the NDC is attached there. There is a corresponding adjustment where the NDC can transfer or can move, right? Because of the nature of the differences actually between the countries, Dr. Maespino. So Megan, you want to comment actually on the trading side, on the volume and the prospect, and how you see that evolving?
So if you look at the most active carbon exchange platform right now in the world is called Expensive, CBL. And we look at their data last year. There are 160 million lots, 116 units that are being traded on the market, which I believe it's almost about 800 million US dollars. So these are the kind of markets that we're looking at and see, okay, what can we learn from these markets? And I think that if you look at putting it in the Indonesia context, on the first day of trading, there were for almost 500,000 units of carbon credits that are being traded, although none of them are NBS granted. Yeah. But we are seeing this sort of excitement in the market and seeing look, this is the market. This is probably one of the most promising market in the regions, and that is the reason why we're here, why we need to have these market infrastructure. This market infrastructure, it's the monetization platform for all of these project developers ultimately, and it gives signals to the markets, because when the prices are being formed, prices are being discovered, this then will trigger an avalanche basically of the next generations of business owners or even project developers that are looking at this market, and this is the viable way on how they monetize their business. Yes, the market has been soft lately. I mean, if you look at the markets, the prices have been corrected, but this is a normal commodity cycle, isn't it? Prices goes up, prices goes down, and this is a typical cyclical markets, and we're just here to provide the infrastructure for people so that when people are investing in the long-term future of these carbon projects, they have the most trusted platform and the most efficient markets and make it happen and basically becoming a catalyst in the market.
So you're essentially still quite bullish when you look at the medium term, not even long term?
Medium term.
Okay, fair enough, fair enough. Now, because time is running out actually, but I do have one last question to all of the panelists. So we've talked about the whole universe in terms of the prospect, potential, enabling environment, regulatory environment, certification, financing side, best practices like from China, ETS and so on. Now, one quick question, because ultimately we are here to talk about ASEAN carbon market. What are the two things, the two most important things that you think should happen in the near term in order for us to scale up the carbon market in Southeast Asia? So, Xingyan, if you're still there, I can't quite see you, but if you're still there, can I start with you? There you are. What are the two most important things that needs to happen in order to scale up the carbon market in Southeast Asia?
I think I only need one point. Is that do you really position the carbon market or ETS as an essential tool to cut the emissions, as the EU or California do? This is the most important thing, I think. If we are clear about this position, that we will know that the carbon market or the ETS will flourish. If not, if you just treat the emissions scheme, trading scheme, and also the carbon market as one of the emissions reduction measures, and those measures are so many, we don't know which measure is more important or essential than others, then I don't think the carbon market will have a flourishing time.
Yeah.
One point. Thank you.
Thank you, Xingyan. Very loud and clear on the ETS. Tom?
I think it's one point in a way, but it's two ways. I think it's trust of both sides, whether it's capital coming in and understanding what that means, whether it's from corporates locally, and that trust in terms of the acquirers, and then from the projects, and I think the registry point was really important. I think that's a global issue, and everybody globally has to trust each other to actually develop that in some way.
So that maintaining that integrity, through the trust and the registry process, very clear.
Right. Yeah. I think it's, for me, it's money, specifically in the form of green finance, right? I think we see a lot of, major corporations and traditional financial institutions waiting at the sidelines, sort of waiting for that signal and the clarity to say, you know what, I want to, get into the market. And I think that, as with a lot of things, if you have, the money coming into it, right, that's really going to drive the market, right? Whether for developers like Jeff, indirectly influencing government, policies and initiative, and then of course, influencing the infrastructures and the standards. So I think, for me, it's the money.
So the buyers' coalition, those types of things, actually very important, actually, to bring that capital.
Absolutely. Okay. And it's not just buyers, if I can add to that. It's the buyers, but also the financiers, right? Which is important because that really channels where the money goes. Yeah.
Thank you, Jeff.
I think the money is there. Earlier today you said the Net Zero Banking Alliance is under pressure to actually invest in projects. So you have the money. You want
our KPI, my bonus is dependent on actually.
So you want to put
unfortunately,
the money.
I'm behind.
Yeah, right. So I'm going to call you out on that. But the traditional banks won't be investing in this sector until they know that there's assurances around prices. Your models in the future, it's all just guesswork if there isn't a carbon tax. And so I think the emergence of carbon taxes, the implementation, it sets clear signals around pricing, and then this sector can move into and mature and receive debt finance, which I think is critical for scaling. Right now, it's still VC money, high risk investments, and in order to scale, it's got to become more mature and safer investment. I think also countries should be less prescriptive on the methodologies and the standards companies are using. I think the markets will really dictate which ones are the best and have the integrity. I think the Integrity Council on voluntary carbon markets is great. I don't think we need a global auditing organization. I think we have to trust in the markets to really distinguish what is high quality, and that will happen.
Thank you. Really great insight, super clear. Last but not least, Megan.
For us, carbon market, it's a very elegant solutions on how we price the priceless, which is our nature.
Price the priceless, I like that.
Pricing the priceless.
Pricing the priceless,
and
yeah.
Our positioning is very clear. In order to make this market works, we need to believe and be committed in delivering only the highest quality of carbon credits that will be coming on the platforms, because then this will be the key differentiator of us compared to the other platforms. And obviously, we cannot be alone here. The market needs to be connected in a global level and in its time to be interoperable, and basically unlocks all these opportunities that we have in Indonesia as the next new big thing for our country.
Thank you so much. We've come to the end of our session. I would like to thank all the esteemed panelists, all the 4 of them on site here and in Shenzhen. Thank you very much, and we hope actually that this has given some insights to the audience here on the carbon market in Southeast Asia. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you once again, Pak Donny and the rest of the panelists for very insightful session. So we're now at the end of today's event. We would like to remind everyone that tomorrow we will have 2 more roundtable events, roundtable discussions. The first one will be on financing green infrastructure, and the second one is on financing energy transition. And we also have a keynote speech by the Secretary General of ASEAN Secretariat. So we look forward to welcoming you all tomorrow at 9 a.m. Thank you.